I almost was not going to use your coaster, but I better. Eh?
It's okay. The table's pretty tough. These planks were underneath a rig. Underneath one, as part of its life.
That's cool. Good story to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, exactly. I have a picture of it too, so to show under the rig and then in the form of a table, so it's kind of neat. Cool. Actually, I should throw it on the wall. Yeah. Well, Bob, welcome to the studio. Though the last time we met, it was in Ottawa, and we were just talking about
Freedom Convoy.
Freedom Convoy.
It was awesome.
It was in a hotel room, and we had to come back and redo it because halfway through the phone rang and I hit the wrong mute button.
Oh shit! Yeah, I remember.
So I have contingency plans now for that. So that's it's a little bit better as far as the quality, and I'm glad that I'm able to have you in the studio now.
Sure,
I've
pleasure.
been looking forward to this for a while. I'm just going to introduce you, and then we can kind of go from there. You were on episode 34 back in February 2022 during the Freedom Convoy.
Mm-hmm.
And you are a repeat guest from episode 34 and has been serving member of the Parliament for British Columbia riding of Prince George Peace River in Northern Rockies since 2011 and a member of the Conservative Party. Bob Zimmer was born and raised in Dawson Creek, BC, with roots to the local oil industry. Mm-hmm. He eventually became a journeyman carpenter and operated a small construction business. In the late 1990s, Bob moved to the Fraser Valley for rugby, later attending Trinity Western University and earning a degree in human kinetics. After completing a teaching degree at UBC, returned to Fort St. John to teach at North Peace Secondary School. Bob's political journey began in 1988 with figures like Ralph Klein and Preston Manning serving as political role models. After campaigning for Randy White in Abbotsford, BC, he joined the Conservative Party Prince George Peace River Electoral District Association, and Bob successfully stood for the riding's Conservative Party nomination in 2010 when the incumbent MP Jay Hill announced he wouldn't seek re-election. Since his election in May 2011, Bob has consistently won with a significant vote share, focusing his campaign on balancing federal budget, infrastructure development, and pension reform. In 2017, Bob endorsed Andrew Scheer in the Conservative Party leadership election. After Scheer's victory, he was appointed Deputy Critic of Treasury Board. In 2019, he was elected again, garnering almost 70% of the vote. And shortly thereafter, Scheer named him the Shadow Minister for Northern Affairs and Northern Economic Development Agent. So did I capture that okay?
Oh, that's way too much, but yes.
Hey, there you go.
Lot there. Yeah.
Well, that's my biggest, I think, learning curve is trying to hit on everything without it being this big, lengthy book.
Yeah. Well, it's there. It's funny how it adds up after a while. The resume gets a little longer as you spend
you've been
more
in
time
this now for quite some time, so there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Before we kind of continue on, I thought I'd try something a little bit new.
Sure.
I just started getting into a lot of people showing a lot of interest in the podcast itself.
Well, I thought you were going to ask me to do Pilates or something.
And
I've never done Pilates.
Almost that serious. You have quite the sense of humor. That is awesome. No, I want to be able to kind of throw some acknowledgement with different sponsors. And
sure.
I don't like how I got to do it in the beginning and then you get into the episode.
Sure.
So the first one I'm going to do a shout out to is Can Have Today. And I'm just going to share this photo with you here. Because he's a local company that has gotten into different creams with essential oils that deal with all kinds of different stuff. He's got a blog here that touches on just about everything you can think of for skincare, burns, healing bees, sunburns. Here's the scarring, all kinds of inflammation. He's got a couple of awards already from Corporate Vision Canadian Business Awards. In Fort St. John, he's in a couple of different storefronts, like at the health food store, and he's getting into SOGIEs and Safeway and whatnot. So a lot of those things maybe I shouldn't he's in the process of doing, but really exploding. So his website is a tremendous source of information and a sponsor of Kevin Unscripted. So I wanted to make mention to him. And another one that I think you're very familiar with is Cordova oil field. Dave Ergang. He's
David well.
a big fan of yours. And most recently with the fires that we were dealing with, they put up a wash bay for being able to help, or I guess there was a meeting of people trying to figure out how they can help a lot of the farmers, particularly with some of the fence lines and different livestock control, because of how it just went through, some of the properties and wiped everybody right out. So
all the fencing that went down. Yeah, it's
exactly.
a big deal.
Yeah. So Cordova, they're very involved in the community. They deal a lot with like hydrovacs, if people know what those are about, but tanks and fluid transport, vac trucks, hot oilers. And then also they've got pipe services. They've got a laydown yard and can move tubing around, casing and whatnot. So
I think it's one of the biggest pipe yards that in the area.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think they've got, I'm going to have to clarify this, but I think their pipe yard is right along the rail line too, which is a huge advantage when it comes to getting some of the stuff in and out. So Cordova, also a website, check them out, Cordova Oilfield Services. I appreciate the help Cordova and Can Have Today. Two people that I think I hope a lot of people hit up and show some support on. And what else do I got here before we get into the juicy stuff? Well, one other thing I did want to touch on. I did an episode with Brian Peckford, and one of the things that he said, we're talking about how people can get involved and be a part of positive change. And one of the things he said that was a little bit outside of the ordinary, kind of what you would expect to hear, was to try and engage civically in a positive way. That also included, getting involved and keeping people, MLAs and MPs, in contact and engage them in ways that, are a little bit more on a positive level, which is kind of what we're trying to do here. And so, a lot of what he had to say resonated in a way, and I appreciate the fact that you're actually, helping out with your constituents in touching on all these different topics that keep coming up, because let me tell you, with how things are changing all the time, it's difficult to try and get that information out there, especially in a way where there's no misunderstandings.
Right.
And I hope we can maybe touch on that here, within the time that we're going to spend. So thanks again.
Yeah, no, pleasure to be here.
And one other thing is your riding. I've got a map here.
That's the 10th biggest in the country.
Massive. Yep. Here you go.
242,000 square kilometers. We've added a little bit with this redistribution. There's a little portion of Prince George that's been added to the riding, but it's quite small geographically.
Well, yeah, geographically it is pretty big.
Yeah, we're about a quarter of the province.
Where does that? So Prince George, you share that Prince George city limits with another MP.
Yeah, so if it's hard to, because it kind of takes this funny little route when you get through Prince George. But if I was explaining it to folks that know Prince George, I have the old part of Prince George, like the downtown core. And as soon as you cross the highway, College Heights and that is Todd Doherty's, and so he's my colleague to the west and to the south. But my riding goes all the way from, or our riding goes all the way from Valemount. That's really the southern tip. Yeah. All the way up to the Yukon border.
Yeah, Valemount, it goes all the way down south. That's right into the Rockies, going over into like where Jasper.
Beautiful country. Mount Robson's in my riding. So
man, that's a huge area. So this area is like a couple of countries as far as landmass, isn't it?
I think it's still bigger than the UK, and there's a few other countries. Yeah.
Wow. But
I wouldn't. If some ridings literally in Toronto are 2 blocks, city blocks basically. But I wouldn't trade mine for theirs any day, because they're kind of an urban riding. I love the riding. It takes a long time to get across it, and maybe it is a detriment to some of the citizens that don't get to see me that often because it's so large. But I wouldn't trade it for any urban area. It's beautiful out here, and it's. We were in Ottawa for a bit when the kids were small, and people will ask, well, why did you move back? And I said, well, every year I asked our kids, where would you rather be? And they said, well, we'd rather be in Fort St. John. It was, and people, why would you move from a nice big city to Fort St. John's? Because it's home. we love it here.
Yeah, I feel the same way about it. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer for some people than others.
Yeah.
But every time I travel, I enjoy traveling, and then I'm pretty glad to come back home.
See,
and I
isn't
can't
it-
envision
yeah.
myself being in the place that I'm visiting at that time. It's like,
Exactly.
man, it's just too. People complain about having to drive an hour and a half to work here, which
Yeah.
is fairly long. But people do that for free, commuting in places like Vancouver or just about anywhere else.
When I went to UBC, every morning it was an hour and a half into UBC and back. So 3 hours every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Even coming out here is like such a big deal. But, that's not a big deal in a city. That's
No.
like 4 blocks.
That's right. I wouldn't trade living in this city for here any day. So I love it here.
We've got a lot of stuff here.
Okay,
when I was
let's get
putting
going.
some of this together before this a lead up question, because, how do we touch on absolutely everything? And I was like, how am I going to structure this in a way where it's going to have the best impact? And I wanted to start out with kind of going off of what we talked about earlier, because when you're getting into what we're hopefully going to touch on a little bit with the whole array of different things, I think it's a lot easier to manage if we can figure out a little better way of getting people involved.
Yeah.
And bridging all these little groups and factions and points of view and everything that seems to always be so fickle and polarizing, because we have different things happening, right down to crime, CTA forming. You have Paul Brandt, who is a country singer, down trying to voice and bring more awareness around human trafficking in Kelowna.
Yeah.
You have Jordan Peterson, even though he might be polarizing, but one of his messages is get involved, right from youth to all the way up to adults. And you have different groups that are forming now, starting to get kind of stereotyped. And I think it's coming from an area where people are really starting to get concerned about all these different subjects.
Yeah.
But how do we start bringing all these people together? Because I think, quite honestly, it's a bit of a unique opportunity that we didn't have before when life was, so rosy. And so what do you think, like when say people need to get involved civically, what does that mean? Like for you, what would you like to see as someone on your end of the line? Like, how do we do that?
Well, maybe a bit of my own story. So I never was, I started off and I go to schools and when I go speak to classes, it's very nonpartisan. This is what an MP does and that kind of thing. But I ask a question, how many in the room, how many of you think you're going to be the member of parliament work in Ottawa with the prime minister? And no, maybe one hand goes up.
Oh, wow. That's pretty good.
And then I ask, how many do you would never be the member of parliament? You think you're never going to be it? And most hands go up. And I say, well, I was you.
Yeah.
Back in the day, up until probably a year before I ran, I would have never guessed that I would have ever done this. But so my story started when I was 19. I joined the Reform Party. It was then I'd seen different things in government that I didn't like. It was when I became a taxpayer. We were always conservative, but it really started to bug me when I saw, it was a distinct number too. I'd made $30,000 at this, I think it was 6 months in, and $10,000 was income tax. Mm. Well, then you start caring about what the government's spending your money on or mismanaging your money on. So it makes you motivated to make sure that the right guys are in office. So I got involved with the Reform Party, who had a pretty good message about fiscal responsibility. And I often say there's still a reform type movement in Ottawa. And it's like, we need to be fiscally responsible for taxpayer money. And so that's an ongoing process of reforming what's broken in Ottawa. And what this prime minister has done is broken a whole bunch more since we've been in office in 2015. And it's going to be a long time to fix it all. But getting back to your question, how do you get involved? It's just simply getting involved at whatever level you feel. I guess I was never kind of inspired to be involved at the municipal or provincial. It was always federal. That's where I saw, because some will run for this to get to this to get to that. But I would just say for the folks out there, we need good people on school boards. We need a lot of issues in schools right now that are going against parents' rights and different things that need to be addressed. And in the province, we need folks, good people in leadership in the province. But find a place that you feel that needs to be changed. If you feel there needs to be a change, and then just get active.
Yeah.
And what I did, I joined the board. So I became a board member. And then the more recent, in 2004, 2003, I got involved with Randy White. And I thought, well, the election's coming up in 2004, I should get involved, and just got involved down there, helped put up signs. Before I knew it, I was vice president of Abbotsford EDA. And, but anyway, and I would say get active if you want to join an EDA. An EDA is kind of our conservative arm of what I do as my job as a member of parliament. It's our local conservative group that's our board. So often right now it's difficult to get people to join boards on multiple levels because volunteerism has really dropped quite a bit in the last 10 years. But get involved in a local board or on a local board and make a difference. That's people ask me, why do you do what you do? And I said, well, I started because I wanted to make a difference. That simple.
Well, that's a few of the things that I've heard that were, I think, pretty decent ideas, and I think a point of view that should be, I think, part of the message is you get out what you put in.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we do have life pretty good. I mean, Canada as a country, I think, has afforded us the ability to not really actually care. And now we're actually starting to get to that point where we're being affected personally on a personal level in one form or another to where we start to care a little bit. And I think honestly, it could be as easy as attending some of these meetings, put asses in seats, man. I mean, it makes concerts profitable. I'm sure it'll make change when it comes to political or civic points of view.
And we've seen that with Pierre. I've toured with Pierre several times now, and the rallies are just incredible. Yeah. And it's people that are highly motivated to see a change because they're seeing our country's getting, run into the gutter with this current leadership. That's my opinion. And so they're motivated. And I've never seen it, even with Stephen Harper, when Stephen Harper was, I came in 2011 when we formed a majority. So it was at a pretty good high for us as a conservative movement in the country then. That movement it pales in comparison to what we're seeing
what
right
you're
now.
seeing right now.
Yeah.
Well, this is a nice little segue to get into, I guess, the foreign election interference too, because that kind of overlaps into where a lot of people, especially in this area, Bob, I mean, if when it comes to this statement, maybe to not the government, but how our electoral system's set up and the mistrust in it. And then you've got foreign election interference.
It's incredible what's going on.
People don't think that their votes matter.
Yeah.
So, what about that? Like foreign election interference. Let's start with that. What is actually going on there?
For most people have probably seen the stories about the Beijing, the communist regime in Beijing has put influence, resources into unelecting some of our conservative members last election. And even our former leader, Aaron O'Toole, was briefed by CSIS that he was a target and briefed after, like a couple of years after the fact. Instead of being told in real time that, hey, this is affecting you, the government, what we see, has suppressed that information. And so our members, Michael Chung's another one that maybe many people have heard of as well. So where the leadership in Canada, the Prime Minister knew about this happening. So Beijing deliberately spreading misinformation about our candidates, spreading rumors on social media around our party, where it actually caused a couple of our members to be unelected. Alice Wong, I think, in Richmond, and Kenny Chiu is another one. But so here you have a foreign government influencing a federal election and the federal government doing nothing about it. Right? Because
those are two very wrong. So first, how are they interfering? Like, what's the mechanism and
WeChat
their tactic on?
Social media is the battlefield. So WeChat, I remember talking to Alice and Kenny about it during the election, and they said the chat rooms that are just going crazy right now, rumors about us, not liking Chinese people and different other things. And they're Chinese themselves.
The misinformation and disinformation,
and just
all of that.
Just swirl it, but it's one thing for people because it's free speech. Somebody can say that. Somebody can say they don't like Bob Zimmer. That's fine. But it's different when a foreign government is doing that to change, to put a foot on the scale of the election.
100%.
That's a different thing. right? You're causing a power shift to happen. And what we see is there's an obvious benefit to this prime minister is he wasn't doing well in the polls last time around. He just got in as a minority government with the least amount of votes in history. So the fact that they helped basically help him win his majority, I mean, that should be a problem for any Canadian, regardless of political stripe.
Yeah, the reason why he's not doing anything obviously is because it's to his benefit.
Well, that's speculation, but we can read between the lines, can't we?
Well, I'd like to kind of fill that out a little bit in the fact that this has been there's a pattern I'm seeing. You know, Jody Wilson-Raybould and the Lavalin deal. I mean, we could probably, I don't want to get down the list, but there's a whole list of different examples.
An Indigenous lady who I respect a lot. I know her a little bit, know her sister too. First Indigenous justice minister gets shown the door by this guy and gets away with it. Like, that's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, what he gets away with.
Yeah.
And going back, like with David Johnston now, how is that, like, that's something that is so blatantly wrong as far as a biased approach, that at least there seems to be a little bit of a focal point of unity when it comes to all the opposition parties saying, whoa, wait a minute, like this is really wrong. So where are we sitting with that? Like, what is going on with this whole...
So we were opposition motion. So the NDP put forward a motion on Monday, really saying that we don't want this rapporteur. We don't think he's doing what needs to be done, and we want that to change. And so the vote came. It all passed. So we basically said, the Liberals said they like David Johnston, like what he's doing. Everybody else said we don't. And so that happened. So I asked the NDP that morning when the debate was going, I said, well, this is great. And I said, bravo. I think the video is out. But how long is this going to last? Is Jagmeet Singh going to stand with us when there's a confidence motion and actually bring these guys down? Well, an hour and a half later, he said, there was an article posted. He said that he wouldn't bring the government down, wouldn't cause an election because of them, the Liberals, not... He wouldn't pull his support for the Liberals just based on this. And what I read into that, he doesn't take it that serious. So foreign interference doesn't matter that much to Jagmeet Singh that he's willing to bring down a corrupt government. And I think,
there's obviously got to be some benefit in it.
Well, there is. There's a written agreement
to break a coalition.
Yeah, there's a written agreement, which is really an unheard of thing in a minority parliament. Usually, every kind of vote is something that's been negotiated. It's really an unheard of thing to say, we're going to pre-sign an agreement before this gets going that we'll support everything you do.
Yeah. What is that even? That's not in a democracy. How is that possible? We've seen that on the provincial end of things here with the NDP and the Green earlier with
similar
Oregon.
Type thing. Yeah.
What is is that even...
Yeah, well, you can do it. Obviously, you can get away with doing it, but you see, people ask me all the time, well, what can we do about this? This is terrible.
Well,
and
that's a good question.
Well, ultimately, you answer to the electorate in a future election. Short of pulling them down in a confidence motion, they should pay a price for that next election. And I think even this opposition day motion, foreign interference that the NDP did, I think they're feeling the heat. Like, they're kind of supporting, propping up this corrupt government. And I think their people are just, a lot of their members don't like this agreement anyway. And this is pushing them to a place where their leader's very unpopular for doing so. I'm
going to show that video of you kind of calling out the NDP.
Sure.
A little bit. But before I do that, going back to, I guess the tactics that foreign interference has been using. You talked about the social media thing, but then there's a lot of
there's other
what is
stuff
this?
Too.
This what is the cops, the Chinese,
the police stations?
Yeah,
thing?
okay.
Yeah.
What is that?
So there's different stations that we discovered that were across the country, and specifically in Quebec, there's still 2 that are operational today that we've heard. And this is where allegedly citizens of China are being kind of held to the standards of the mother country in Canada. So, you might be brought in to be asked different questions about you're doing this or X, Y, or Z. And so you know, it's one thing to have an embassy or a place like a consulate where you can go in and get your passport updated, or, you know, because we have that as well.
Yeah.
But to actually have it where you're policing your citizens in another country,
Yeah.
that's a huge problem in and of itself. The part B to that problem is that this government, the current federal government, knew about it, didn't do anything about it, still allowed them to exist. And then we found out just last week that there's even funding that they've received from the government to function.
So it's just crazy. It isn't sanctioned, and I really take what I see on TV with a grain of salt. But is it like some of these places that are set up doesn't look like it's anything official at all? Right. It looks like a fairly run-down storefront, like what you would see mafia style. Like there's nothing there that would distinguish it as an actual
right. And some of it looks very. I think they got tipped. I saw the one example. It looked like they had left. There's like people had just walked out the door. They didn't want to be part of any negative story.
But how is this still going? Like,
you tell me.
Well, you're closest to the heart on that one.
Well, so this is the problem we have with Minister Mendicino, because he was asked in the House of Commons, whenever I say the House, that's what I mean, whether these were shut down, and he reassured that they were being addressed and all the rest. Well, we know that he didn't do that, because even after he had made that statement, it came out that the Quebec ones were still open. So that's where I've made different posts where I say you can't trust a thing these guys say. And I stand by that. You can't trust the thing they say.
But the fact that they can get away with something that's so outlandishly wrong.
But this is why
it's unreal.
I had this conversation with some colleagues yesterday, and this is a story that I think we kind of understand, but we don't. So the only way we're finding out about some of this stuff is through CSIS leaks, right? And I talked to some members of, former police officers and stuff too. I said, I think what we're missing is how significant of a thing that they're doing here, because we don't normally say leaking secret information is a good thing. But you think of the risk they're putting themselves at in their careers. I mean, they will probably go to jail if they're discovered for doing this. So imagine somebody who so cares about their country that they're willing to go to this end, but they've had it so they're so tired of kind of watching this thing go on that they're saying, okay, I've had it. I have to tell the truth about this.
Yeah.
So it's still not good that they're leaking, but
it isn't. But I'm glad you're pointing that out.
Short of that,
there's a moral.
We wouldn't be hearing about most of this stuff.
Well,
right now.
When somebody speaks out and it's coming from a moral and a principle that you find yourself so concerned over, that you are, like you said, you are willing to pretty much put yourself on the line of fire. You're sacrificing not only your career, but you're putting a lot of people that are close to you in the line of fire.
Your whole future, you might be in jail after.
How can you not listen, whether you agree with that or not? You know, the respect to actually listen when somebody is putting themselves into that position.
Right.
And that's right across the board. I think anybody that does that should at least have the opportunity to have their voices heard, right? Whether you agree with it or not. And I don't see why they're so viciously attacked and nobody's actually stepping in and saying, okay, we something's going on here. If this is what's on the surface, how much below the surface is actually really happening here?
Right.
It's
and the thing of it is we've known this, like the foreign interference, we've known it. We've heard it firsthand from our colleagues that's going on. But it's a mess.
I'm gonna share this. I told you I was gonna share that video, which is I like this part. I gotta take it.
An opposition party in the House. I really want to say thanks to the NDP for finally standing up like an opposition party and acting like an opposition party in the House. So bravo. I guess I would ask them though this question, because I know it's been our party that stood against this special rapporteur all along, and it's been this party, the Conservative Party, that's really been the only party that's trying to bring this government down because of its corruption and many other issues. So what I want to ask, Madam Speaker, directly to the NDP, how far does this new opposition go? Will they stand with Conservatives and bring this corrupt Liberal government down?
I want to remind members, if they want to participate in the debate, they need to wait until it's the appropriate time to do it. It's not when someone else is speaking. The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I know that the Conservatives are blinded by partisanship. But the issue here is this. They seem to continually forget that it was the NDP, by the way, who first moved the motion to call for a public inquiry at committee and in this House. And here we are again calling for Mr. Johnston to step down for a public inquiry and for PROG to undertake this work. We are taking the issue seriously, not blinded by partisanship, but on the importance of the issue, on why this needs to be done. Don't just look at me as a person who's been impacted by foreign interference and other members in this House, but also the Canadian public and how they're being impacted and why this work is so important and why this motion is before us. And I call on the Conservatives to support this motion.
So I really want to say thanks to the NDP for filing.
The funny part of that is, what was my question was, are you going to stand with us at the next opportunity to bring this government, this corrupt Liberal government down? Did you get an answer for that?
No, well, that's the thing.
Would have been an easy answer to give. Yes. Yeah. Yes, we're going to do that.
Well, why is there so much sidestepping? And people just, it's like, honestly, I mean, it's like dealing with kids. Like it's this big, long, drawn out sidestep, and then you got to ask the same question. And I've seen that a few times. Pierre actually is getting pretty crafty at being able to pigeonhole.
Yeah. But there was a really good moment in the House this week where he was asked, the Prime Minister thought he would joke about Pierre's previous career experience, and then Pierre's answer was probably the best line of the year. So
what was it?
I don't know if you saw that.
Well, I seen that. I seen the response on Trudeau saying he was a teacher, and
yeah, and then Pierre asking about, it was you'd have to, you should pull up the video, because the video really speaks for itself. Yeah.
The high school drama teacher over here accuses others of liking the sounds of their own voices. This from a guy who, if he were made of chocolate, he would eat himself. But we don't want him to do that until after he answers my question, which I keep asking. It's about the cost of groceries in BC and everywhere else. Now, he's right. The NDP has already put in a carbon tax there. But he wants to force them to increase it by almost 40 cents. Yeah. To 61 cents a litre, a federally imposed tax by the costly coalition of the Liberals and NDP. How much will it add to the cost of groceries for the average family? How much?
Honourable Prime Minister. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I was a high school teacher before getting into politics, and I'm having a little trouble remembering what exactly the job that the Leader of the Opposition had before getting into politics.
He soon regrets that shot.
On supporting Canadians with a grocery rebate, with a growing economy, with great middle-class jobs. We're delivering health care supports for Canadians from coast to coast to coast, delivering dental care that has helped 300,000 kids access dental care over the past number of months, including 1,100 in his own riding. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to be there for Canadians.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, and he left right in the middle of the semester, and I'm having trouble remembering why. Now, Mr. Speaker.
And that's it. I sit about two desks behind Pierre. I'm right behind him there, so we usually have a chat after as he's walking out. So yeah, no, it was Mr. Trudeau's. Anyway, didn't go well for him that day.
Well, it didn't, but it still kind of goes to, like, how effective is speaking in the House of Commons, really? Like, it seems like when you're talking to opposition or government or wherever, you know, they're able to sidestep, and you're bringing up some real concerns that just don't really have any bearing as to what the opposition has to do for concerns.
Well, I'll compare it, because people, this is probably the biggest frustration for people that reach out to me on social media, and I say, well, it's called question period, it's not called answer period. So it's like free speech anywhere. They're allowed to say whatever they want to say. But usually, like, I'll use the example when I was there with Stephen Harper, we had a majority. He would get up and answer every question that was asked of him specifically, and he would answer it. And, you know, that was just the standard that he had, because I think even myself principally, is I I'm a representative of my constituents. They're asking me a question. I'm going to answer them. Some days I might say, look, I don't know right now, or I'm going to look into it and I'll get you an answer. It might take me a little while, but at least I'll give them that. But these guys, even when I was asking the housing minister simple questions, it's a post I had on Monday, he didn't even try and answer one question. So usually what I'm getting at, Kevin, is that usually you pay a price with the electorate next election. They say, look, that's unacceptable that you're not answering questions like that. You're supposed to answer to us, the people. And I just think the voter needs to make folks that act like that pay the price in the next election.
It comes down to communication. If someone asks you a question and you don't have the ability, skill, or respect to be able to articulate a proper response, especially when you're in government and, obviously in a position to dictate and form, I think, decisions that are going to affect the nation.
Yeah.
The very least you can do is be able to, instead of sidestep or use broad terminology, have a little bit of a prepared response that's going to hopefully explain your position on it. Whether people agree with it or not is irrelevant.
But I think you nailed it with the one word you said, respect, because I think the skills are there. They're communicators. They're politicians that have won elections. They know how to speak. It isn't about that. It's about the respect or lack of. And when you saw even the housing minister come in and not even attempt to answer one question, it's like, well, I'm representing two groups of people with my job. I represent people in Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies, but I also represent my portfolio and the people that entails, which is all the territories and all really northern parts of the Western provinces. So when he chooses not to answer that large group of people, because that's what he's in effect doing, because I'm the shadow minister for Northern Affairs, Arctic Sovereignty, and Northern Economic Development, he's just brushing all of us off.
Yeah.
And that when you said respect, that there's a big lack of respect by the way he doesn't answer questions. Yes.
Well, he's obviously looking at certain parts of Canada with more interest than the others because of how that's going to serve a purpose for him. It's a voting population.
Sure.
That's concerning.
But when you're the housing minister, you're not the housing minister for whatever your riding is in Toronto. You're the housing minister for the country. So when you come to a meeting, you know very well you're going to get asked questions by me about it. You should know some basic facts about what he thinks I might ask him. Like what I did. Is there a housing crisis in Canada? Simple answer to that. Yes. I even quoted him in an article that he said yes, and this is what we're doing. So why couldn't he just say yes in the House, though? He obfuscates and says something completely different. But anyway.
Well, with the housing crisis,
it shows a lack of respect to Canadians. That's it.
It does. But when it comes to housing crisis, there is a housing crisis. And one of the things that I think Pierre Poilievre is taking a lot of heat right now is a video of a lot of people that were homeless in Kamloops, I believe. Or is it Kelowna?
Oh, the tent one?
Yeah. And
Kelowna.
Kelowna, and referencing it to looking like a third world country. And some of the opposition kind of said, well, that's just what did they call it? Anger factory. You're causing an anger factory, and
it's reality on the ground, though.
But that's just it. Is there no? I guess the concern is there's no ability to be able to have that conversation and look at maybe a decision being made and learning from that. Maybe they're not hitting it right off, and there's room for improvement. Yeah. And it's hard to not think that there's an ulterior motive to it. That's why you see a lot of different groups and factions starting, is because everything seems to have such an ulterior motive. Yeah. What do you see from your end of things? Like, is that true, or is that just maybe misinterpretation?
We talked. We both know Aaron Gunn. I've gotten to know Aaron very well, and his Canada is Dying video is excellent, really well done. But I mean, he gives the blatant, blunt truth of this is what it looks like. The back streets of Vancouver and the back streets or whatever in Nanaimo, for goodness sake, in these areas that are retirement communities, are looking like third world countries because of this. The decriminalization of hard drugs. That's the reality, and I think the government wants to keep everybody in a happy place where they don't see that kind of stuff and the reality of some of the really poor decisions that they've made. So, somebody that's saying like, look, we're offended that you said that about us. I think, like, come on. anybody in this, especially politicians, we shouldn't be so easily offended by language. We should be concerned about the effects of some of these decisions are having on real people.
Yeah.
Real people are dying because of these decisions.
That documentary Aaron Gunn made there, Canada is Dying, sequel to, I think it was a little bit more of an expansion to Vancouver is Dying, both of which are an amazing document.
Yeah.
And one of the parts that stick out in my head when it came to that was when he touched on that pharmaceutical company that was
Isn't that something?
really being sued by the government for the opioid crisis, but now is actually the same company providing, what was that, diluted or
dilaudid or
like
the dillies they call them, the
which are like 4 times more powerful than the
I thought there was morphine and that was
Oxycontin.
Yeah, and then but keep going.
Well, the fact that company, I've got it wrote down here. What company was that again? That was I can't remember. Oh, it was Purdue Pharma.
Yeah.
That's the same company that not only was supplying the Oxycontin, but is the same one providing the dillies, which are far more potent, and they're giving it out freely.
And called so-called safe supply.
That's the word that he mentioned, was that is a very misleading word.
Far from safe.
Far from safe. Now, Alberta is being attacked for their ability, their approach, I guess, on how to take instead of free drugs, they're kind of putting it underneath the umbrella of treatment centers, recovery, especially if you end up getting treated for overdose. You're now forced into, having to be able to go into a treatment center to be able to have the tools to manage, that addiction or mental illness or whatever you want to end up calling it.
And I don't even think it's forced. They just, what I saw was they just need to ask for help, and it's there 24/7. You need help, you can come in right away.
Okay.
So,
about that, like, that's a pretty concerning thing, especially with the impact on smaller communities like Dawson Creek and Fort St. John.
Yeah. Well, and I think just what you said, Purdue Pharma, I think what Aaron referred to there, it's something. Before I watched the video, I didn't realize that a lot of these drugs, they're not given out by some drug dealer in the back streets. These are being bought at pharmacies by the thousands per. Like the one pharmacist that was anonymous on the show said, giving out thousands per day. And what the problem is, it's getting in that, I think you saw it too. I mean, anybody watching your show here or listening should really make it a priority to watch that program that Aaron's done. It's about an hour and 20 minutes, but it's worth every second. But to see that pharmacist say, these drugs are getting into the hands of teenagers now. Like, in the one girl said down to 12 years old, and that's what's getting them hooked on opioids. I never knew how easy of a path that was to get those drugs, and then all we have right now is a government that says, "Hey, let's decriminalize it," so it even opens the doors even wider.
Is that a provincial? So because Alberta is handling it different, does this fall underneath a provincial?
It's a bit of both. Because you have a component that's the criminality of it's federal, but the province still is responsible for healthcare, so it kind of crosses over into both. Fields.
One of the elements in that documentary is it sure looked like it was being presented in a way where it was because of profit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's terrible.
I can't believe it's not exploding. Yeah. When a single independent journalist is able to come up with that kind of information, and yet nothing. It
makes you ask a couple questions. Where's the federal media on this? Like, where is the mainstream media? Why haven't they done a similar story to that? They have a lot more resources than Aaron does. I mean, he's just got a very small production crew, if you've ever seen him go around and film stuff. And so why is this story just allowed to languish until he exposes it like he does?
I think that's why you're seeing a lot of people get upset, though, is why, how, and what can be done about it. And you're getting a lot of people that are starting to, right down to different political parties. The federal and provincial people are popping up because, of the concern, and there is nothing, it seems like, that can be done. Why, how, and then at the same time, I just seen a commercial from the federal government on how they're going to be putting these health warning labels on independent, or individual cigarettes. You're putting a health warning sign on labels on individual cigarettes, and yet you're going to give away free
decriminalize
heroin
hard drugs,
and cocaine.
Yeah, figure that one out. Some guys have I've seen social media posts where they get in trouble for drinking a beer on the beach, but they're allowed to consume narcotics at will. So you think, well, that's just insane.
Well, and it's spilling over into, it's close to parks, schools, daycares.
Yeah.
People are being affected by it because they're hitting. Who was telling that story about that needle in the toilet paper roll in one of the washrooms? I
haven't seen that.
I think that was on that show. But anyways,
well, I see. But it's and so we're talking about hard drugs, and then you look at its connections to the probably is equally as big a problem. It's increase in violent crime. It's all kind of intertwined together. And we have a government that instead of doing more to keep sort of prolific offenders in jail, they give them bail and they make it easier.
Yeah.
They don't make it more difficult or even keep the status quo. They make it easier to get out.
Catch and release.
Yeah, and that's one of the parts of the video is, there's these folks that are doing this and they're committing these crimes, repeated crimes over and over and over and over again. And that same police officer has to watch that same person walk out of jail after morning appearance in court, and they're out doing the same thing all over again. Like some of these, you've probably seen that there was, I think, 200 individuals responsible for 11,000 incidents with police.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it be a lot easier to arrest and deal with? And I'm not even saying just put these folks in jail, give them treatment and try and deal with the problem. But you can't really help them unless they're in a contained area where you can help them get better, even the criminals, right? Or the addicts or whatever. But because that's often the case. It's a very small amount of individuals committing these crimes. It's not the prolific part of it is the amount they're able to do. A very few amount of people.
It's the opposite. A very few amount of people can have the biggest amount of destruction, but then I think the same is true on the opposite end of things. They say that a very small amount of people have the biggest amount of change.
Sure. That's that 20-80 rule.
Exactly. I mean, it's even in business, 10% of the workforce accomplish 50% of the work.
Yeah.
It's the exact opposite. So I guess right now, with part of this small percentage having the most amount of destruction, is it the criminals or is it the government in power?
Yeah, it's both. It's a government enabling or allowing, instead of stopping criminals from doing what they're doing, they're letting them keep doing it.
Yeah, and it's demoralizing for the people that are on the ground. RCMP especially.
Try and recruit police officers today.
Exactly.
Right? It used to be a profession that a lot of people wanted to do. It was a profession that, again, a lot of young people wanted to go into as a career, just to, again, make that positive difference for your neighborhood and your country. But it's tough now, right?
Recruiting and I think retention also when it comes to the seasoned people that have been in there for a decent amount of time. I've talked to a couple of them just in different conversations, and that's definitely the flavor of the topic is, you know, their frustration, not only with their abilities to be able to do their job, but then also the recruitments and the standards that are they've been dropped to be able to attract more people in recruiting, and it's just an eroding system. So it goes back to the same one. What can people do? I think. Well,
I think that, but it goes back. You know, it sounds like a gong, but it really is up to the governments that people elect, right, and who they have represent them. And I think they've been kind of led down the garden paths. Mr. Sunny Ways was going to be all this let the sun shine in and make everything better. It's like a disinfectant. That was his message when he ran. Well, I've never seen a more secretive prime minister or cabinet.
No, I
or
remember
government.
the first time he campaigned, it was all about transparency.
Hope and change,
Government
right?
transparency, hope and change.
Baloney. One of the worst I've ever seen. So
what about...
that's how it gets changed, though, honestly, is that you vote for a government that isn't that way.
Even in this area?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like
Goes
this area,
for everybody.
because that's part of the problem, and I think we need to talk on that a little bit, because the voter apathy, we touched on it the last time. I've talked about it actually. A few different people.
Yeah.
Your vote, it doesn't seem like it's going to have any kind of change whatsoever, because everything government's formed before we even have a chance to cast the ballot.
No, but every time I hear that as an argument, I disagree. Because, and I'll use this as an example, a real example. So in 2011, when I was elected, it was because people say, oh, that same thing, the votes already decided. BC still hasn't gone to the polls. When we came in, it was right down to the wire. We were watching, we were a minority government. We had enough numbers for a minority. And it was only when BC came on and our MPs that were elected gave us the majority. And so absolutely every vote matters. And even so, I'll tell you this much. So one name that people might be familiar with is MLA Shandro from Alberta. Well, he lost his position, doing some great things around firearms and really provincially pushing back on the federal, confiscation program. He lost by 7 votes. So you tell me, I say back imagine those 7 people that were either watching the hockey game or they were whatever they were doing that night, and I would be mortified with myself that I didn't get out, especially in that tight of a race. But every vote matters, absolutely. We have good turnouts in Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies. Our voters are motivated, and they're just good folks that they love their country like I do, and they want to make sure there's good leadership there. So we've managed to keep that strong, but I think voter apathy is a real thing, though. But we need to take it seriously. Who do we want running the country? Somebody it's like when you look at the chaos that's really ruling the streets now, it's a different place than I remember growing up as a kid. And I mean, our riding's still pretty good, but there's a lot of these opioid issues that are affecting our communities too, and people are dying.
One of the things that was brought to my attention that really made a bit of a difference, that speaks to exactly what you're talking about. Maybe it was you or it was Mike. Anyways,
yep.
Said that anytime you go to one of these, like especially when it comes to election, it's always the same people in the same seats, and it's usually only a small handful of people. And we go back to how a small number of people can make the biggest change. Mm-hmm. And when people aren't engaged, you're leaving a void for someone that you disagree with to fill that spot when it comes to civically. Now, if you don't think that your vote ends up mattering, 90% of the eligible voting population don't even vote or engage, which is a damn good thing, in my opinion. Because if it was 10% that weren't, and 90% of Canadians were actually involved, and this was the government that we had, I'd be scared. I would be. I would be. I'd be like, but now if it's only 10% that are actually engaged, we need to get the other 90% of the people that are out there to actually, and it doesn't take a very big percentage out of that, 2%, to have an overwhelming result in one way or the other. So, I mean, that's something that I'm going to remember when I go to the polls, is that there's only 10% of the people going to actually vote. And if we can get more people, especially the ones that have such a strong concern about the government right now, instead of forming a group, well, I shouldn't say instead of forming a group, but maybe using some of those resources to go and actually vote, of the heart, instead of strategically, I think the result would be astounding.
Well, we get federally here about easily 60 to 70% turnout.
In this area? 60 or 70?
Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies, So, but municipalities, I think recently in the by-election was quite a bit lower. But yeah, that's I think it's a challenge for people. Sometimes they're working different things, but we need the good candidates to step forward too, to run for councils, for school districts and all the rest of it. And I think now that things are in such a chaos, I think people are paying more attention to who those people are that they're electing and what they're doing. What are they actually voting on when they're there? And they should be. Public should be more engaged with who they're electing.
What about internet censorship? Bill C-11 specifically. That was a bill that was passed, wasn't it?
Yep.
Well, what kind of effect? What is that outline?
It's going to be potentially huge. So when I spoke about it in the House, I was the former chair of the Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics Committee. So we oversee this stuff, like the privacy and internet and stuff. We're the ones that held Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook to account and all that. So I know it well. But it started off as C10. Now it's C11. But the bottom line, the effect of it's going to have, it gives the control over to cabinet. This is the same guy, by the way, the prime minister, who's not told people that they've been targets of foreign interference. This is the same guy who now has control over what you can see on the internet. And people say, that's absolutely true, because what used to happen before, a good example I'd say of this happening was the Twitter files in the U.S. Very similar, where the current administration was asking Twitter can you deplatform these guys or take posts down because of this, all just based on what they were doing it for them.
Yep.
So what that does, what C11 does, it gives that, and I would say that's, I mean, you can speculate whether that was legal or illegal, but it definitely was. There's some questions to be asked. But C11 now gives the ability of government to do that here legally. So let's say cabinet says, well, I really don't like the term Kevin Unscripted. I have a problem. This guy said some bad things about me. So they send in an email to YouTube or whatever the platform is and says, we got a problem with this guy. Yeah. Okay. And down you go. And you're either dialed down. They still say, you might look like, I still am on the platform. I haven't been deplatformed, although deplatforming can happen. But then you go, why did my likes go from, or my views go from 20,000 or whatever it is to 3? What the heck just happened? Well, Trudeau gave himself the power now, Prime Minister and Cabinet, really, the ability to do that. And the process will look like this. It's, what's the group again? It just escaped me. CRTC. It gives the ability of Cabinet to instruct CRTC to do X. And so it can tell them to do whatever it wants to. And it's a certain section in there. There's 4B. And there used to have a provision in it where it allowed for user-generated content to be exempted from this. But that part was stripped out of it.
I've got one here. Is this what you're talking about? Because I did make a note here where it says specifically section 4.2 seems to prioritize Canadian content over algorithm-driven suggestions. Is that what you were talking about?
I think it's 4.2b is the one, because it's kind of when it says we are going to protect user content in one paragraph, and the next paragraph and it says except for everything else.
Oh man!
So that
gives them the ability to pretty much actually tell you what fits that.
Anything.
Yeah, exactly.
So it would be anything that they think, under the guise of disinformation, they could do whatever they want. They could instruct the CRTC, honestly, to do whatever they wanted. And what an example related to that is even Facebook talking about blocking news from Facebook. They're testing a lot of because that part of the bill hasn't really come through yet about the user-generated content. Anyway, but it gives them the ability to kind of do what they want. But the government now, in essence, makes it legal to do so. Well, so if you're at one of these platforms, it's like, okay, well they're the governing agency. I guess it's like the RCMP of the internet.
Yeah, it's like mainstream media.
They're like, okay, well, we have to do it then.
Yeah, exactly.
And even Elon Musk, and I really appreciated what he's been doing on Twitter, and just allowing, really caring about free speech. He still said he's going to abide by the law. So, no, it's a concern. big concern.
It's happening already. I can tell stories, and we were talking about it earlier, where it's a real thing. And in fact, actually, more recently, I got a website up, and I've got a guy, Shannon Stangy, shout out to Shannon, that did it. And you know what I found out through the back end? I don't know how. I'm not very techie this way, but I'm looking at all these numbers of downloads and algorithms, or whatever you want to call them, and he told me a completely different number for downloads. And I'm like, where are you seeing this number? And he's like telling me where it was.
Yeah,
and
you said that. Yeah.
it's wildly different than what I'm seeing. And so that was one of the reasons for our website, is because this C11 is definitely having an impact.
Yeah.
And one of the only ways I'm able to go around it is to try and redirect all my traffic through the website, where I have more control over analytics.
Yeah.
I must have said something wrong, or had one too many people that were not quite
you were
fitting.
You were at the Freedom Convoy. That's
that's where it started.
Yep.
You know, hey, all my accounts crashed, and I even shortly afterward had an episode with Brad Brain, and he's like, well, there's nobody's accounts got frozen. I'm like, hey, whoa, mine did.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even over anything really serious. I couldn't even promote your episode, and you're an elected MP.
Yeah, there you go.
So isn't
that something?
That is something. I mean, maybe it's because I'm experiencing it and it's actually affecting me, and I'm seeing, oh man, this is very alarming, that a lot of people might not see because it's in the background. It's not like something that you're aware of. It's just shadow banning is exactly that. It's a shadow.
Yeah.
And it's having a lot of control over what people are seeing, and that's very alarming.
It's a big deal. Well, I said it when I was chair of the ethics committee, was the social media is our digital public square. And it's been used again after I said it. I don't know if I can take credit for that statement, but or for the term, but it's the digital public square. So you talk about freedom of speech. It's imperative that we allow people to say, views that some might offend some others, and they might not like what we say, but we should have the freedom to say it.
Yeah.
But so when that starts being affected by this, by bills like C11, I mean, that's a big deal.
Are you being affected by it? Do you see it on your end of things? Like, I gave an example of kind of what I'm seeing.
Well,
what are you...
so we saw recently, and I don't know if I can attribute it to C11, but Facebook recently went through an adjustment of how they treat political posts. So I have 13,000 some followers and almost 5,000 friends and that. So usually my stuff, when it goes out, you just have a certain expectation based on the post of getting a certain amount of views and that. Well, just a few months ago, we realized we're getting like 2 views and 1 share and 1 comment. And it wasn't just me, it was all of our colleagues, the same kind of experience. So we saw they had dialed us down. And I don't know if I'd call it a shadow ban, but it was an adjustment of how they treated political posts. Because even if I was just Bob Zimmer Joe, like regular Joe, and not a politician, it just should generically produce a certain amount of not content, but of interactions. So that's what we've experienced, and the only way you can get around that is you kind of get creative with how you post it, and you get the likes up again. But that was just a couple months ago. So that's the closest that I've had. I haven't had any, this factually checked or something like the Liberals. They've been fact checked a few times now on Twitter, and it's quite funny to watch.
Have they? Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Okay,
it's funny. Freeland
it
was
the Justin Trudeau team is getting the same experience?
Well, I don't know about that. I just know that during the last election, Freeland, one of her statements got fact checked as being incorrect. Which was
good.
Quite funny.
How's that taste?
Yeah.
Okay.
So but the C11, that's a big deal. And so I'll just bring it fast forward. I'm a little concerned about the impacts during the next election. So what impact could that have? Well, if Justin Trudeau sees that we have a slogan that we have in our campaign, or whatever, maybe some hashtags that we're using that are very effective, and he deems them offensive, well, there it is, right? And then these social media could be asked to shadow ban those particular phrases and Who knows where it'll go?
I don't know.
And
I
will,
mean,
will he
that's
do
a
it?
good question.
This is a guy that
Where's it
will
gonna go?
do anything to stay in power.
Yeah, well,
Anything.
you might see Kevin Unscripted fizzle.
Yeah.
Well, right? I mean, it's at what end? And if
Yeah.
it's not this year, where is it all going? Because these are the entry level beginnings of a dictatorship flavored, I think,
And what's
approach
it-
on a lot of different things.
When it's like cooking the frog, right? There's so many of these things that have been happening. People get a little bit kind of, oh, well, whatever. But the one that really hit me was, we were thinking about these police stations, these Beijing police stations in Canada. And then they found these in the States. And immediately the people that were there got arrested and were dealt with quickly, and they were shut down immediately. And you think, well, that's what our response should have been.
Yeah.
But instead they just get looked the other way. Well, where's our national media on this stuff? Why aren't they digging into it? We'll say Globe Mail's doing pretty good work on this, and some others, but it's like we're being lulled into this is all okay. It isn't okay. And thankfully, we have social media as an outlet, because if your stories aren't going to get out in the mainstream media, I mean, some of the views that we get, they're way bigger than national media gets anyway, honestly.
Yeah, it's not too hard.
Yeah.
I'm noticing that some of even what I'm doing is touching the needle on even
Awesome.
a lot of the mainstream in this area.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, no, that is good. But I mean, Trudeau, he's wanting to control guns, speech, money, food, energy,
Yep.
mobility.
Yep.
He has in the past. Have you seen that show? Okay, we were talking about documentaries. Have you seen one of the shows? It's also on Netflix called How to Be a Dictator.
No.
That's a good one. I'll put Canada is Dying, and then I'll also put that one in the links on the description.
Yeah.
Very interesting, because what they've done is it's, I think, a 4 or 5 part series where they've taken Hitler, Stalin, North Korea's whatever his Kim
Jong-un or Il. Yeah.
And they lay it out in how these people started out, I think, with genuine concern about their city and the citizens, or country and their citizens, and how they rose into power and ended up, with the historical ending that we all know about. And if you take any one of those scenarios, and they've got a playbook that they go by, and you overlap it with what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Okay, man.
I know.
Just
I haven't seen that. Probably
you should watch it.
yeah.
It's a hell of a good documentary, and I think it's something that once you start seeing the playbook, they call it, you start picking up on certain things. And freedom of speech, I've come to, and mobility and all these things I took for granted. I think a lot of people should actually take that a little more seriously.
Yeah, agreed.
For sure.
Yeah.
What about SOGIE?
SOGIE. Mm-hmm. What do you mean?
SOGIE. This is a big deal when it comes to the schools. I know Fort Nelson School had.
I know I've heard the term. Just remind me, because it's
sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. So this is where Bill C-4 was just unanimously passed when it comes, and that's what I'm wanting to know a little bit more about as far as sexual re-identification and what that age limit threshold is.
Well, I think as a parent, I'll just make a comment as a parent, because I know there's been I've seen some conversations about different things, and I think parents should have a big part in the decision making, and we're seeing where schools are trying to make it okay to not be informing the parents about different decisions that are being made around this stuff, and I think that's completely wrong. And so I don't like the direction that's going that way. It should be, the parent should be, as we are involved with our kids' lives from the day it all began, right? They shouldn't be excluded from very significant decisions like that either. So I think that needs to be, if they're trying to pull away what parental rights are in those areas, I think they're making a big mistake, and that shouldn't be allowed.
I did actually read I went on the literature online right from the Parliament website. It's hard to follow. you know, it's really hard to figure out exactly what the meaning because the wording is fairly plain, but it looks like they are, and that's where I really want a clarification, because it looks like they're taking the ability for guardians or any kind of parental element out of children's, like, if a child wants to be able to make that decision, that's a.
So I think in just kind of what you were talking about that term, but you're talking about the conversion therapy bill.
Yeah.
Is that the one you're referring to? Yeah. So it's not that everybody in the House supported it. We came to the position we wouldn't be against it, or we wouldn't continue to fight against it. And what I saw was that the majority of the House was going to rule in a particular way. And then this is the reason, this is what I explained to people at the time in the area that had questions to me and how I voted. It was, the Constitution is very specific on freedoms and rights, and that is always the backstop to any legislation. So whether it's the right to speak to your pastor about a decision you're making, or you're speaking with a parent, or you're speaking with any kind of, that freedom it can't be obstructed by this particular law. That freedom still exists. So any parent that's under the illusion that this will somehow prevent you from conversing with your kids about this, or that your pastor can't talk to your children about a particular issue, well, that's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution says that you do have that freedom. And that really, that bill was, it wasn't limiting that in any way. Any bill can't limit the Constitution. There's a term that we call in the House the constitutionality of any new law. Any new law has to sift through the Constitution, and it can't even really come to the floor unless it kind of is superseded by the Constitution, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, that's good to know. It's just so hard to try and, like, I read it. I went through the effort of finding it to begin with, and then trying to read it, you know. And
any parent going through this decision, though, or any questions about it, read the Constitution before you read that bill, and stand on that Constitution.
It goes back down to what do you do? Like, how do you go about it? I know it's voting for government, but when you're skirting a threshold there that is that important, I could see where the concern is. I think everybody shares it. It doesn't matter which end of the aisle you're on. That's something that actually is hitting pretty deep, especially when it's getting into the school system. So,
no, it's a big deal. And that's why, again, you know, what we've been seeing some parent groups getting involved in electing certain people as part of school district boards, and I think that's awesome, because that's who should have the say. It's parents who should have the say what their kids are seeing in school and what they're being exposed to.
No, that's good. I'm looking at the time here, and we gotta wrap things up here.
We'll go until I say, hey, I've got to go.
Oh, yeah, super cool. Okay. You did. You were just recently down in Kitimat a little while ago with Ellis Ross, and you were talking about LNG
too.
Exactly. So, where are we sitting with that, as far as the ability to be able to take our clean energy, natural gas, and export it to possibly China, but any other market?
We just had a bill. We had a vote on this ourselves about the carbon tax and some of the illogical things that this government's doing about it. It ties into what you just asked me, though, is because a big part of our argument was, you really want to do something significant rather than reduce our own, sort of our more minor issues in Canada. Where we could make a huge difference in carbon or emissions, period, is give Asia and other areas around the world that will even want it, our liquefied natural gas. You could reduce the emissions by half, right?
Yeah.
In a massive way, rather than our 1.7% emissions. Even if we make that 1.3, it's negligible effects on anything anyway. So why not do something positive? But we have governments, and I'm just reading different stuff on some of the green ideology is any kind of fossil fuels are negative to them. But so they need to see it as a logical step to reducing emissions. It's really good. You see even in Germany and Japan, they're asking for our natural gas. They don't have resources enough to, especially in the winter. But to me, it's just crazy that we're not developing our natural gas.
I don't understand that.
We should have, the Russia. Again, my portfolio has me looking around the Arctic quite a bit. Russia is building like crazy their LNG capacity and the ability to export. So it's bizarre to me that we're not at least we have so many resources. The example I always like to bring up when we talk about this stuff is Norway. Norway is considered one of the most environmentally sort of positive countries in the world. But guess what they do for their income? They develop oil and gas and they offshore, and they do it a lot. And they have the highest electric car per capita in the world as well. So here they are, environmentally respected, but they still develop fossil fuels, right? In a good way, though. They do it responsibly. They have a good aquaculture. They have, they fish a lot in Norway. And guess how much debt they have, Kevin?
Probably next to nothing.
They have kind of like what
I would think.
Well, so they have $1 trillion fund that they fund different things just out of the interest. And they have the only debt they have is like what is somebody that doesn't have any debt, but they have a credit card. So they kind of have this credit that they use from time to time just for different purposes. But they have $1 trillion fund. In essence, they have no debt. And their country is, what, a tenth? No, not a tenth. They have about 6 million people. So, but
and we're 36 million roughly.
Yeah. And we're probably going to get to $2 trillion in debt here pretty quick with this prime minister. We should be Norway times 10.
Yeah.
Right.
We have the ability for it. Yeah. And the thing is, I don't think it's a responsible, ethical way of being able to harvest energy. I don't understand.
We do it the best in the world.
We do. That's actually something I didn't even know until about 10 years ago. And you're right. I know a lot of people that go down all over the place, and they're coming back and they're telling me stories about exactly what they're, how they're going about doing things. Yeah. Wow.
Well, and the standards.
Some of the stuff
you work in the industry. You know how high the standards are in Canada.
Oh, it's unbelievable high.
And you spill a couple liters of oil or something on site. Well, that's got to be documented and cleaned up and all the rest of it. It's incredible.
Well, I think you mentioned the Canadian carbon footprint globally is about 1.5, 1.7%. China's 12 or 13, but we'll call it 12. If we can knock them down 2%, we've just not only hit net zero, but we're in a surplus.
I think China's a lot higher, actually.
Are they a lot higher?
Yeah, I think they're more like...
Well, we're being very...
I thought it was 32, but 32 or 23. Yeah, something like that.
So there you go. And didn't they come to Canada looking for some of the LNG?
Absolutely.
And they were turned down.
Yeah, well, and we had 15 projects and more that were really... would send a lot of it to Asia, specifically to those areas that need the energy. But so they're going to use energy of some sort anyway. So it'll either be liquefied natural gas. So they have, what I understand is 16 or 15 natural gas ice-breaking freighters that Russia will be delivering natural gas to China. That's part of the planning, coming over the top, so right through the Arctic. That should have been us.
Yeah.
And could have been us, right? Just for the purpose of whatever you might not agree geopolitically with Beijing and how they're doing things with Uyghurs and all the rest of that. But even just if you care, so say you care about the climate and you want to reduce emissions, you should be doing it for that reason alone. You should be saying, Canada, we should be getting natural gas to Asia.
And the whole reason that they're turning all of these opportunities down is specifically because of climate change and the efforts to be able to wean ourselves into a different form of energy. Is that what this is about?
I think so. It's blinded by ideology where they're just completely against fossil fuels. I asked Elizabeth May this one time. We were in the Air Canada lounge together. We fly a lot, so she flies on the same plane often that I do back to Vancouver on the way up here. And I asked her one time, I said, what are you doing here? Like, what are you doing in the lounge? She goes, well, I'm flying on a flight with you. And I knew that. I said, well, do you realize what they put on those things in the plane?
Yeah.
And so, she said, oh, you're so cute. I said, but Elizabeth, in a serious question, do you support any fossil fuel development? And she goes, no, not any. I said, well, how can you do that? Because that's hypocrisy. And she got after me. I called her out in the house one time and called her a hypocrite for this because she uses it. And she didn't like being called a hypocrite. But I said, Elizabeth, if you're using any fossil fuels and you don't support any use of fossil fuels, you're a hypocrite. And she couldn't answer, right? But that, I think that's a question, and we're hearing that whether it's who's the guy, the actor that flies around his jet to Davos, Leonardo DiCaprio.
Is that Leonardo DiCaprio?
Yeah, there's many others that do it too, but all these guys that do as I say but not as I do. But I mean, that doesn't, people are actually very perceptive of that hypocrisy too. They are, and they don't like it either. But I think what that average citizen that cares about the environment wants is a real solution to this thing, and that's a real solution, is get natural gas. You want to half emissions? That's an easy way to do it.
Do you think that pipeline's gonna? It's pretty much done. It's on the final stages of being completed.
Yeah, no, it's doing well. Yeah. Well, no, it's doing well in that the contractors are getting the job done, but the cost overruns are just insane. It's at $31 billion now. This is a pipeline. It shouldn't have been 10. Shouldn't have been 10 billion, but now it's up to 31.
And what are the reasons for that? Is it the red tape that's being thrown at it, or?
Well, there's that, but so.
Like, I feel like you just led me into a perfect opportunity to kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
Here's an example. So I was talking to somebody who's working on the pipeline, and they told me this story about needing a tree spade for the pipeline. And well, anybody out there watching, a tree spade is one of those trucks you see with 4 kind of blades, and it picks up trees and moves them, right? From different location to location. And the person said, well, why do you need a tree spade to their supervisor? And they said, because normally you use a hoe, right? You do it and it's quite easy.
Yeah.
And they said, well, because we're moving anthills.
Oh.
So
oh, wow.
So they're moving anthills, folks. And anybody really, it's not just a northern thing. Anthills are usually a menace to most northerners and really anybody. And hey, ants have a purpose. Fair enough. But I've never seen a shortage of ants ever being a thing. Actually, where you actually have to move anthills. So there's that aspect of it. So this is part of the project. It's something that they're doing, but it's the costs. So it's one thing to say that we're going to move anthills if it's, it's negligible, maybe cost. We'd argue that it's not very effective. But that part of the pipeline, this was an update that was a year ago. The cost to move anthills in this one section of the report, second page, is $50 million. And I'm not kidding you, $50 million. There's some other aspects of it. There's providing pathways for frogs and tagging. I don't know how you tag a snail, but it's doing sort of all these.
Serious?
Dead serious. I have the documentation. I'll read it off for you.
Yeah, that's unreal. Tagging a snail.
Because most people look at me and they go, "You're kidding." So I'll read it for you. And again, this is right from the proponent. Okay, this is paragraph 2 on page 2 of the report. I'll send you the update. It's a public document too. The project has moved more than 100 anthills, moved almost 150,000 amphibians and thousands of fish and snails, and created permanent homes for snakes and birds across the project. Protection of snakes, badgers, snails, frogs, and anthills are done with great care along the areas of the pipeline through relocating, tagging, and providing crossings. They even have it in quotes. These unplanned efforts have added $50 million to the project cost. And so there's another, and hey, I'm a conservation guy too. I'm a co-chair of the Parliamentary Territorial Caucus. We care about hunting and fishing, and we do care about conservation, right? So I'm not saying that it's not important to take care of wildlife along the way. But this is kind of another level. This is, what I've termed is this is what it looks like when a woke government builds a pipeline, right? And so another part of this aspect to this 50 million is there's been another $120 million added to the cost for sort of the man hours around this, like to build the structure to kind of organize this effort. There's another 120 million, so $170 million added. And the key to it all, Kevin, it isn't that it's owned by some other company. This is owned by you and me. This is the taxpayer who's paying for all this stuff. So here you have it where I hear different folks where we don't have clean drinking water in Iqaluit for people to drink, but they're paying $50 million to move ants. I think this government's got it all mixed up.
Allocation of resources are wild.
When you put it in that context, then you go, okay, something's mixed up here.
Yeah. And I think at the same time too, what's the alternative? I mean, that's a serious question. What's the alternative? I mean, there's no way, like, you're going to charge your phone, but you can't have, like,
you're talking about
you're not going to have a phone.
Yeah.
Fossil fuels. The ability for alternative energy is focused on electricity. And that's kind of where I was going with it, because the alternative is quite literally far more destructive.
Yeah.
And you need a lot of the foundation and resources to be able to actually produce an alternative, option.
Yeah.
And Site C is an example of that, because I know it's very controversial, and there's a plot of land that is going to be affected where it's non-recoverable. I honestly do that, but I get that. But you're generating hydroelectricity, which is supposed to be the greener alternative. And it just seems like anything that's built out where it's somewhat sustainable, whether it's wind farm or solar or hydroelectric or nuclear, whatever it might be, it gets to a point of where it's nice and warm, fuzzy feeling until it gets to something sustainable, and then it's attacked. Site C's no good. So what's our alternative?
That's
like, what are we doing here?
That's the big question, though, that they can't answer. So if you talk to folks on the left, generally people like Elizabeth May, and you ask, okay, what are the alternatives? And they'll come up with some reason, well, something renewable, this or that. Well, if you talk about wind turbines, they're only 10% efficient. They're good, but can you run an area of the country that's goes down to minus 40 for a fair bit during the year? It just can't provide the energy necessary to do that. And the example is the north. Any small community, even big communities up there, guess how they're all powered? It's not hydroelectric even. It's diesel.
Or propane.
Right. That is the reality. Or people freeze. That's the simple reality up there. And so people can come in and say whatever they want. There's got to be other theories, and they go home to Toronto or wherever, to Vancouver, and they live their life in their nice place on the waterfront. But that person in the north still has to deal with the reality of that. So a great example, kind of segues, ties into what you're saying. The carbon tax. I asked a question this week about it, about northern mums who are having to decide between, paying their cell phone bill or paying for food or paying for their heat, all because the carbon tax has impacted them so much that they have to make this decision, because we've seen their heating oil bill basically double.
Yeah.
So it really is costing people. They're going hungry or going cold because of these kind of ideas. And there has to be more of but I mean, you kind of asked it too. There's certain people that are just unrealistic in what they are stating as what's possible, but they need to deal with what actually can happen on the ground. And if there's no other options, then don't penalize people, because, don't charge somebody a carbon tax in Dawson City where they have no other option other than heating oil, because it's supposed to sort of push you into using another form of energy for things.
That's just it.
You don't have the options. But
these
guys
don't have options.
These guys don't,
and the standard
matter.
of living, is high, and we've come to really appreciate it. But is also, I think, one of the single points that has allowed, third world country and poverty to come up to a higher standard of living right across the board.
You got it.
So if you take all that away,
yeah.
And the standard of living for everybody goes down, including third world countries. What are we trying to solve here? And I understand, like you touched on conservation, being stewards of the land is very important. I don't think anybody underestimates the importance of that. I see it in our industry all the time. It has driven for a lot of technology and procedure approaches, and a lot of really good things have come out of it. But to shut everything off and completely go from one to the other without having a transitional period from one to the other is just unreal. And then at the same time, restricting your ability. So climate change is a global impact. So if you aren't collaborating with other countries, like what we touched on earlier, I just don't see really what are we trying to solve when you've got a country like China, a dictatorship country, that they don't care. They really don't. They're concerned about their citizens, and that, I think, is what's cutting the deepest with a lot of people, especially in this area. Maybe not so much in Victoria, where there's a bit of a disconnect there, but so how do you communicate that, Bob? Like, what do we do here with that?
You would hope that because if you even went to Victoria and you went down to see how most people, there's probably little pipelines that go to their houses to run their furnaces too, and their hot water heaters, right? Or they're electric and they're fed by another source of energy that, whether it's produced, there is energy that's produced here by natural gas, that's electricity, right? Ultimately, it has to come from somewhere. And if they're realistic about what's available, they would be honest about, okay, well, they have to use fossil fuels for energy. And if you're going to have to do it, then do it in the least polluting way possible. And that's natural gas, right? Even coal, there's some really good clean coal operations now too that scrub basically everything out of the air before it goes up the exhaust stacks as well. They've come a long way. But a realistic conversation has to happen though, yes.
Does that conversation include, like, what do you know about in this area specifically when it comes to some of the permitting and Blueberry and the ability to do business, especially, in the oil and gas or even the forestry industry? You're seeing a lot of these mills getting shut down and whatnot. Do you know anything as far as what the landscape looks like with that? Yeah,
I just spoke with the chief. She was in Ottawa with some of her councillors this week, Chief Desjardins. And the the Blueberry decision has been made. I've known Judy for years. She's had an oil and gas company herself for years with her husband Boomer. So they get the development of resources. I'd say, in terms of that decision, that its decision's been made. And the permitting, it sounds like there's more surety now that decision's been made, because the permitting was all kind of being held until that court case had been decided. Well, now it's been decided, and things should kind of proceed from there. I would say, as an aside, this provincial government is not very hospitable to oil and gas development, right? They look for every excuse they can to slow things down or cog up the gears, however you want to call it. So I think I can see some good things. I know some of the band leadership, whether it's Doig or you name the bands, it has some pretty solid leadership there, because they work in the oil and gas fields themselves, right? And they want to see their neighbors benefit. And I don't blame them for benefiting from some of the resource development either. If it's, hey, I think the sector should benefit everybody in the region. And I'd hope with the decision now done that will start happening again. I've heard things are moving, and I've heard the permits are coming a bit more steadily than they have been in the past couple of years. So I'm just hopeful it'll continue.
Is it hard to try and elaborate a little bit on what that decision looks like?
So that decision came out a little while ago now, a couple months ago, I think. I was just actually driving across one of the new bridges. I think it was the halfway bridge. When I heard the news, I pulled over to listen to the radio. I heard Judy with the prophets. Anyway, so I want to talk to a few more stakeholders about it and say, okay, what are the impacts to you? Yeah, I've heard so far things are okay, but I'd like to talk to some more too, sort of the impacts of that decision.
I'd like to talk to someone about that. I think it'd be a good one, because that has a huge role in
I think the
this
chief,
area.
I would probably talk right to the source, Chief Judy Desjardins of the Blueberry, and some of her councillors, Owasco and Gauthier and others. Trevor McAdahay too from McAdahay from Doig is be a really great person to talk to as well, and a few of his councillors out there. And then you hear it directly from the communities. Yeah.
What are you seeing
good
from
folks.
them? Yeah, and that's what I want to touch on, because it seems like they've been put in a position now of where it's. I think there needs to be more understanding. Are they in a tough, like a rock and a hard place as far as now taking the backlash? And it's maybe the government setting. It's almost like they set it up in a way where, you know, it was set up for failure in a lot of ways, because First Nations are taking the hit on a lot of anger and some of the stuff that's happening that might not be really, I think, the cause or result of decisions they've made.
Yeah.
And the government has kind of made it very difficult. Can you elaborate maybe on any of that should maybe be touched on?
Well, I would just say it's probably best to talk to them as the source of that.
Yeah.
And again, I've talked to a few stakeholders about it. They say things are okay, they're moving, and I've talked to the both the bands too about you know, just about how things are going and things like that. So and have a good relationship with both bands. So I think that's something I've seen it before used though. I think we have a government, I would point it back more to the provincial government that there was a previous decision around reduction in the moose hunt.
Yeah.
And it came out where the government said, we're going to reduce the moose hunt, you know, because of whatever band. I think they mentioned the blueberry. And I knew that was baloney because I knew Judy said, it's not us. We hadn't, you know, it wasn't our decision, but the province was making it sound like it was the band that was leading the charge.
Exactly.
And it wasn't. So I came out and wrote an article that it was baloney, that it was the provincial government that was suggesting this happen. And then two other, the bands had also written to clarify that it wasn't them. So I think the government tries to implement its agenda in any way it can, and whether that's the federal government or provincial government. So
does this?
But I would say this though. I think I've been asked different questions about these about the bands, and I respect the leadership there very much so. And I just would challenge people, if you have questions, just ask them directly. You know, people don't even know this about me necessarily, that they say, well, you know, we want to ask you a question. I said, well, whenever I'm in town, you just need to let my staff know and set up a meeting, and I'm happy to talk. That's my job, is to listen. So I would just challenge people to, if you have questions about it, reach out to their leadership and ask them directly.
Yeah, that's something I've heard in response, though, is I guess the inability to be able to get a response. What is the best way to maybe do that? Is that like through a phone call to the office, the local office, or
I know what it's
email,
like.
maybe?
For me, is you reach out to either any one of my offices and say you want to meet with me to discuss an issue. And I'm back, like the schedule is pretty rigorous right now. I'm in Ottawa most of the time, but I get back on either a Friday morning or a Thursday night. So I'll usually have meeting time on Friday, but sometimes I don't even get in till Friday afternoon. But just say what you want to do and what you want to ask me about. And if I'm not back, then I'll try and at least have a phone meeting with you. So I know what we do. And we try hard actually to make sure we have a whole process in the office where we follow issues. And if somebody wants to request a meeting from whichever office it is, I'm game.
That's good to know.
Yep.
I think that's actually a really good thing I hope a lot of people take that up.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question about ocean and fisheries?
Sure.
I know you're involved with that. And the last time we spoke, there was a lot of shipping lanes that were being regulated to the point of where the inability to be able to get to shorelines was a real concern. And it seemed like it was just getting a little bit more stifled. You made the example of, you know, with the interest of trying to protect marine wildlife in certain bays and whatnot, it was just like kind of spreading it out across the coastal line where you just hit different choke points. And then it's just a matter
marine
of kind of connecting.
protection areas. Yeah.
Exactly.
MPAs, we call them.
What are we at with that then?
Well, that's a great question, because there's a whole, you talk about a tip of an iceberg. So that question, there's a much deeper issue. So marine protected areas, I got involved with this about 10 years ago, where I was BC caucus chair, I think I was then. And it was brought to me as an issue by the angling community. So people who fish, like with a fishing rod.
Yeah.
And the Shippers Alliance of BC, billion-dollar companies that ship stuff on boats, right? Big companies.
So like what you see on Vancouver?
The big ships
typically
you see, when
cargo?
you come in. Yep.
Okay.
And we have some really great companies that are based right in Canada, TK Shipping being one of them. But these two groups came to me and said, "Hey, Bob, we're really concerned about this marine protected area it's PNCEMA, the Pacific North Coastal Integrated Management Area." So it's an area that's on the west coast of BC. And the impacts of that closure or protected area would be essentially to close traffic from the area. So, and people go, well, they wouldn't actually keep ships out there. Yes, they would. So, and this is all while we're just getting an LNG industry, trying to get it off the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there's this new threat to shut it all down, right? Yeah. And so the backstory to that is PNCEMA specifically, this is when we were in government. So it was a proposal that had been made to us as a government to do. Even some of these eco-radical groups were going to fund it to the tune of $10 million to fund staff it even. Like, it's crazy.
Wow.
And so there's a few of us that got some information about it. We got it shelved. We've said, no, it ain't going to happen on our watch. But what happened was they went to the province and said, hey, we still want to do PNCEMA, but we'll call it a different name and the province can do it. So the province said, okay, we'll do it. We'll take the money. Yep. So, but fast forward to today, that is still very much an issue, because now we have the bigger picture is a thing called 30 by 30 initiative. And it's right out of the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. It's in there. Is to protect 30% of lands and oceans and coastlines by 2030. So what does that mean? Well,
what does that mean?
What it means is protection and conservation are two very different things. And sometimes they're conflated. They're used interchangeably. You think they're the same. But conservation, in essence, is what we would do is we pick up the garbage and we conserve the habitat. So fish and, you name it, game can flourish, but we can still interact with it. We can hunt, we can fish, we can still be part of that process. What protection means is in essence that the only thing that gets to remain are wildlife. Humans are not to interact with any of it. So you basically build a fence around it. Well, most people that live up here, whether you Skidoo in Tumbler Ridge or you in Mackenzie or wherever, quite a surprise when the caribou closures was being proposed. And I met with, sorry, this is a long answer to your question.
No, it's good.
So I was the new mayor of council that was elected in, I think, 2018 in Chetwynd, Mayor Courtier. And council said, hey, we're really concerned about this caribou closure thing that they're proposing. And so we got into it, and I said, well, this is a big deal, because what they were trying to do is shut different areas down from snowmobiling, from exploration, all the rest of it.
Hiking trails even.
Yep. And so we got on it, and so we started having community meetings about it to expose the issue, and people were like, what the heck's going on here? And so there was quite a long thing that developed there. So we got some public exposure to it. And at the end of the day, it went through different communities all the way down to, I think Valemount was the last meeting, or McBride. But it really was an initiative of one of these eco-radical groups. So how it all started, this caribou closure thing, it started with a petition by kind of an eco-radical law group. And they filed a petition with Minister McKenna, who was the then environment minister, who said, we're concerned about declines in caribou in this particular area, right? It was a petition. So she had 12 months to respond to this. So it was in, I think, 11 months or something. Finally, they said, hey, why aren't you doing anything about this? Because it happens. It starts as a petition at the federal minister's level, then it gets sent over to the provincial environment minister. Hey, you have to do something about this, or or maybe say why you don't have to, and prove us with some facts and data you don't have to. That we don't have to be concerned about it. And so at the 11th hour, they come out and say, "Oh, this is happening, and we're supposed to, as a part of the process, we're supposed to consult with the public." And it was a big sham, right?
Yeah.
It was just saying this is what's going to happen. But
there was no public consultation.
Yeah, no, until we kind of exposed it, they weren't really doing anything about it. And some people might not remember this issue, but they might remember the fact that Blair Leckstrom even stepped into this. And he was even brought in to advise the then premier, who's the last premier of the province? Horgan. Horgan brought him in to provide. Blair was going to do some consultation around the issue because they got lambasted for not consulting with anybody. There was CCCR was formed. There's a whole bunch of community groups formed to advise. So anyway, Blair collected all this information and consultation, went to the premier and said, "This is my advice," and they ignored every single piece of it. And so they've implemented these closures regardless of all this advice, right?
Just ramrodded. That's a trick, isn't it?
So
they use a lot.
So that's one example of how they're implementing 30 by 30, because in capturing some of that, so the target area is the 30%. So what does that even mean, right?
Is this part of the Y to Y?
Yes, okay. Yeah, it's all connected. But Y to Y would be sort of it's part of 30 by 30 is the overall umbrella at Davos and UN.
Okay. Yeah.
And Y to Y is a part of that initiative to accomplish that 30 by 30, right? So, but that's one example of how they're doing this. And they're doing this, and they don't just do it one particular method, though. Sometimes it's marine closures, right? Sometimes it's caribou closures, it's kind of under the guise of a certain other thing. But you look at what they accomplish is closing things down and closing access to people. Fast forward to just a few months ago, we saw we lost a couple of mills. And so I talked to one of the proponents who phoned me up and said, "Hey, we're closing, I think it was Chetwynd." And I said, "Is this 30 by 30? Absolutely. And so the term is, it's not that we don't have timber. We're losing access. We have a lack of access to it. And you know what we're seeing with Donny Lakes and all these fires burning, all this, what beetle kill wood that should have been taken down, should have been, and this is a provincial issue, should have been put at a stumpage rate that's will actually incentivize some of these companies to go in and get the wood. Guess what we're seeing it do now? Burn.
Yeah.
And these are from people that supposedly care about carbon being emitted into the environment.
Well, it's been really fueled for climate, right?
Right.
The warming, that's the narrative.
But you look at all the carbon that's going up in the air from those trees.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it have been more effective to log those trees and turn them into lumber? And
I would think so.
You'd think so. So, but getting back to that protection thing is all under 30 by 30, and that's very much a reality. So if you look at the Environment and Climate Change Mandate letter from the Trudeau's Minister Guilbeault, the guy with the orange suit on, you've probably seen him.
Yeah.
And the Ministry of Fisheries and Oceans, or not Bennett, but what's her name again? Anyway, the Fisheries and Oceans Minister. In both their mandate letters, 30 by 30 is in part of the lead paragraphs of what they're mandated to do. It's very much top of mind, priority for them.
That's a strong word.
Yeah, very much a high priority for them to
mandated
accomplish.
From who?
The Prime Minister. And I would say more likely from the groups that got him elected in the first place. Some of these eco radicals that got him there.
That's so you mentioned like Y to Y and 30-30. And just all of that encompassing underneath these radicals and the UN. And when you say Davos, that's alluding to the WEF. Yeah. What exactly? So this is still that WDEF. I mean,
they're very two separate groups.
They are separate. Yeah. But now you're entering into this area of like these wild, what can you talk about on that?
Well, let's just finish up on the 30 by 30. I just would say 30 by 30 is not going away. Another example, I was up in Yukon and I was talking to a bunch of miners there, and I said, I brought up 30 by 30, and they said, oh, they're very aware of it. And they said, well, we actually think we're at about 52% already protected. But the problem,
52%?
52%. It's sort of the effective, you close off areas for protection.
Of the goal, yeah.
But the problem is, he says, we're only recognized that we have only protected 19%. So what that means is they're still going to try and get another 11 somewhere. So they're still going after more. That's what I'm trying to get at. And this is...
So does that overlap with farmland and stuff like that?
This is in a territory where Trudeau has talked about critical minerals being so instrumental in his future. Well, guess where those critical minerals are going to come from? Yukon. So the miners told me, they said, well, you might have heard me say it. They said, well, he's trying to get this stuff done in 8 years, the critical mineral strategy, right?
Yeah.
And they said, with all the overregulation and the closures and everything else, we'd be lucky to do it in 30
years.
Yeah. So anyway.
I do remember you actually saying something about that.
Yeah, I asked a question in the House. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it's real. The closure stuff is real. And is it affecting us up here? Absolutely. Whether it be forestry, whether it be any kind of our natural resource development, or even our recreating in the north.
That, and it goes back to our ability to be able to, oil and gas. Are we going to be able to do any kind of business?
We're not even talking about, some people might have a problem with developing certain resources, certain areas. This is even talking about putting a fishing rod in your hand and going fishing in certain areas, being prevented from doing that.
Wow.
And that's already happening. It's nuts.
It is nuts. Yeah. That's alarming. Well, no wonder there's people that are coming up with there's strong concerns.
Yeah. Yeah, well warranted too. So you talked about the WF. I've been getting a lot of questions about that too. And I said, well, look, Pierre's been very clear that none of us will be going to Davos. I've never been to Davos. I do not believe in a great reset. And so going back, this is a while ago, I posted a video on this when Trudeau had made that comment, that it was a time to reimagine the world economy. You remember that statement?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And Pierre did a video as well, and he got lambasted for being conspiracy theorists about it. But I mean, the Prime Minister said it out of his own mouth, sitting in his own house, and did it on a Zoom call because it was COVID times and it's all on video. And it's a real proposal. They, it's a group that's very influential. Chrystia Freeland is a board member. How are you part of a board as a sitting minister? That's a good question. I'm not sure why she's still allowed to be a board member, because we're supposed to, there's a lot of rules, especially when you're a minister. You're not allowed to be a part of boards.
Yeah, it's conflict of interest. That's a perfect
You're not supposed to be controllable by another entity.
Especially when you're an elected official, part of a non-elected entity that is got obviously a very strong decision-making element
very
when it comes
group.
to And you're talking about the conspiracy end of it all, and every time it does seem to come up, thank you for actually taking it and not sidestepping, because people very slippery.
Yeah.
So it's hard to.
I do not believe in the Great Reset.
No, but I want to go. Okay, well, okay. With that now acknowledgement, where exactly is that going without it going into what's the reality of the implications of WF? What's the reality of? So we can start out with the fact that Pierre Poilievre has been, shown as being part of WEF.
He is not, though.
He is not. Okay.
No, absolutely not.
And same with provincial leaders like Kevin Falcon and a lot of other leaders that are a part of this. So
I don't know about the other ones, but Pierre has been very clear about it, and I know one of the other political guys in the country is falsely said that. But no, you watch what Pierre has said about it. I think True North did an interview and asked him very bluntly that same question. He was very clear. Absolutely nothing, no involvement, and never has been and never will be.
And what implications, I think there's probably a bunch of people right now listening or watching going, okay, what is the conspiracy theory? where's the reality and where's just the unknown, where conspiracy theories start, and where's the potential in between blending the two realities and the potential, like what does that look like? Because we could almost bring up the website right now, and I've poked around and I don't know my way around very well, but when you're looking at like the 15-minute cities and all of these different things that are happening, it overlaps with what we had just talked up till now. Yeah. And then the mission statements and some of the videos that go along with it. Yeah.
Let me this might clear up a lot of things, because people ask me all the time, well, what does the UN have control over Canada, or what does the WF have control over Canada? Yeah. It only has the control over what we give them control over. So, and I say we, I really mean the government. So let me pull that back a little bit. The only control that the WF or UN has over Canada right now is Justin Trudeau and his cabinet. So they could say, the UN could say, we want you to do X. They asked us when we were in government, we said no a lot. They just, nope, I'm not doing that, you know. But it's up to the government to make that decision. The fact that this government is willing to say, okay, WF, we like Trudeau and Freeland, likes that pathway forward. That's up to them to decide, right? Yeah. To not do it or do it. And likewise, when the voter says, well, I don't really want to be instructed to do something by some foreign entity that's got other motives. Well, then don't elect those guys as your government then. I mean, that's simple, but that's what it really comes down to. You know, any other entity has the freedom to say whatever it wants. But it's up to the prime minister and the cabinet, which is the ministers really, you know, and we're not in government. People say, well, Bob, you're government. We're opposition. Yeah. I work in kind of that house that looks it's government, but the ones who make the decisions are the Liberals, the prime minister and his cabinet.
Look, I'm really no different than anybody else out there as far as not having a real understanding of that. Yep. The frustration with not having the ability to put the checks and balances in there. And now I know a little bit more. This is another reason why we could even touch on it, why I reached out and I want to go to Ottawa and go on a tour, because I did something very similar on the provincial. You know, Mike Burney and Dan Davies offered to give me a tour, and so I took them up on that. Yeah. Probably one of the best trips I've ever been on, to be honest with you. As far as learning, there's way more that, I mean, it produced a lot of extra questions I never had before. But that's the point.
That's good though.
Yeah, it is, and I'd like to do the same in Ottawa, because this is, I think, my way of being able to not only get inform other people, but do a part. We're talking about civic engagement, and this is part of it, because without understanding it and seeing what your role is, maybe as opposition, and what the government has the power of doing, and where these connections with Davos and you know, the shorelines, I'm telling you.
It's something when you see, and then you see, I have a map that I do a presentation for my colleagues and others, and I show them what that map looks like already. And this is, I think right now that's 15% or something, and they're aiming after 30, and the 30 is not the final number. The number that they can constantly talk about is 50% by 2050. So you look at that, and you look at the map, you look at it and you go, oh my goodness,
goalpost,
right? And so it's something everybody needs to be aware of, and it's that, and I bring it back to maybe the starting conversation we talked about. We care about conservation, and so they throw out this number 30, and so I say, well, why 30? You know, before it was a certain number, it was 25 by 25. Is more always needed? Well, I would say the better term is protect where necessary. And I'll give a good example. So we were fishing in Sydney. It was just to bring awareness to this whole issue around 30 by 30. And so they have this area, it's called Pender Bluffs, right out of Sydney, right by Victoria. It's a place that's been fished for years, hundreds of years, right? A real key fishing spot for local residents down there. Well, this government, in their brilliance, said, well, we're going to close that entire area 365 days a year because of killer whales. Okay. Well, you and I probably both care about killer whales. I care about killer whales. Absolutely. I care about salmon, and I care about our water. But there's there's other things that you can do other than just a blanket closure. So I'll ask you this question. How many days a year do you think killer whales are in that area?
I'd probably say a quarter, 3 months, so 90 days.
Okay, 3 months. Okay. So we wondered this. So you asked the question to our government. Our government doesn't know.
Mine was speculation.
Which is a problem. Like the fact that Fisheries and Oceans, by the way, has grown budgetary wise. The budget has increased by almost 50% in the last 6 years. It's grown massive. So you think that they'd have somebody on this stuff, right? So they didn't have the information. How many days a year the killer whales are in that zone? So the Americans know though, because Washington State is literally 100 meters away from there or close. Well, they said killer whales are only in that area 7 to 10 days a year.
Oh, really?
Total. So they just transit through, right? Still important.
So it's like the caribou run where it's a specific time of year.
Don't you recognize a pattern?
I mean,
So 7 to 10 days a year. So there's a thing called a bubble closure for people that don't know. You can close an area while the whales are present.
Okay.
You don't need to close it for the rest of the time. That's unnecessary. It's just so as soon as somebody sees a killer whale, it's closed, right? And then you just make sure until you can't see any killer whales anymore, and then you can open it up again. The minister knows that, and she still chooses to close it for 365 days a year. And guess what? How did you start the conversation about marine closures? I think it's all part of this 30 by 30. It doesn't need to make sense. The 30%, it's just an arbitrary target. Is it necessary? Well, close where necessary. How about that? But instead, it's so people like Trudeau can go to Davos and talk to their buddies and brag about they're at 30% now in Canada.
Yeah, well, and the Great Reset and the conspiracy thing, if you start looking into that, all of a sudden everything seems to make sense.
Yeah.
And that's so I know where I'm pushing the line here, but
some of it isn't conspiracy. Put it that way.
I don't think so. It's just trying to talk about it and navigate through that conversation in a way where there's meaning without it just getting, wiped right off the board. Yeah. That's conspiracy. I mean,
well, here's a funny, just crazy story. So the one time we had this was the last meetings of the caribou. That was kind of in the spring, like winter and spring. And then we had this sort of summary meeting. I think it was in September. And during one of the meetings, we heard that somebody talked about, well, the way to get to deal with the lower caribou populations was to get rid of, we all know it's predators is the problem, wolves, right?
Yeah.
So somebody in their wisdom said, well, you know how you get rid of wolves? You have a moose call. So calling means getting rid of moose. You just because of their negative effects, right? So one of their brilliant folks is saying, well, we can reduce the amount of wolves in this area by having a moose call. And so we had a guy that got up to speak in Prince George, and he goes just like that. He goes, but this is a guy. So this guy's an outfitter.
Yeah. He's
also a wildlife biologist. This guy knows his stuff, like with a degree in wildlife biology and an outfitter. And he kind of goes, he says, we know that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because guess what the wolf does when the moose is gone? He just eats the next thing, right? It's a predator. So anyway, fast forward to this other meeting I said after this caribou closure thing was done. And we thought this moose cull was just a crazy idea that was passed and wasn't going to be talked about. Guess what was proposed as a possible way going forward to reduce, to increase caribou populations? A moose cull. And so you think, well, somebody went to the university somewhere and they just got out and they thought, in theory, this should work. But this is the kind of crazy stuff that they're actually putting forward as real possibilities. And you go, and then we have, not within a year or two, we talk about there needs to be a reduction in the moose hunt because there's not enough moose.
Well, there you go.
And you go, okay, well, what is it? What are you going to?
Well,
it's just some of the crazy stuff that these guys put up on the table.
Protecting grizzly bear. You want to talk about a predator that take down caribou and moose and everything else too. That's another one that's protected.
Well, that one was that was blatant because when this current NDP government got into power, they even made the statement that it wasn't based on science; it was based on the politics of it.
Yep. Political science.
And guess what's happening now? We're seeing a prevalence and a buildup of grizzly bear populations now that are affecting things like ranchers and their cattle, right?
And humans.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had a few already on this because of encounters that have turned really nasty, and it's an uptick.
Yeah. And
it's just getting way more.
And for a blatantly political reason. So, yeah.
One more question here, because I know you've been very accommodating.
Yeah.
But
I know
I want to go to. I know this room, it's magical. Okay, so Northern Sovereignty, Chinese balloon.
Arctic Sovereignty.
Arctic Sovereignty, Chinese balloon. We're talking planes, like there's a lot there, but I want to touch on what your trip was like when it came to this Chinese balloon thing. And more importantly, really honestly, more importantly, you've brought up, and I've watched you a few times bring up a lot, many times about sovereignty.
Yeah.
The threat of a very real, well, Russia is up there, and we all know what's happening globally right now, especially with Ukraine. So, okay, what exactly is going on up there, and what are some of your real concerns when it comes to that?
Well, you started, the question was about the balloons.
Balloon, yeah.
Most people know about the situation, and then we were called, what was it, kind of, we were stoking the fires, it was... Canada, it was a NORAD response or NATO response. And, sometimes use because we're a collective, like the Americans and Canadians working together to do things. But what was found out in the end is that we weren't capable of taking out the balloon, and that we had to call in the Americans because we weren't able to respond. So that was the truth of it. We found out months after the fact, right? So you see these stories go out in the news. Once you find out what really happened, well, no, we really aren't ready for threats in the north.
Not if we can't take a balloon out.
No, no, and it's not any denigration of our forces. They're great up there, man. We have some really great expertise, but we need to give these folks the tools they need to take on this modern threat that's up there. But no, the most common story I'd tell is about this green hangar situation. So. And it seems like, well, what does a green building that houses an airplane have anything significant to do in the north? Well, in Inuvik, that's our lead NORAD base in Canada. That is the thin edge of the wedge for us. That is the best. That is the best. And if you go up to Inuvik, you'll find this green hangar. It used to house the air-to-air refueling tanker that we used to use. And right beside it, you'll see where the CF-18 hangars are. And we have a few of these kind of bases across the north. We have one in Iqaluit, and it's pretty impressive, actually. You see this blast wall against it, too, because they come up fully armed. These are the F-18s when they land there and they park. So if they blow up, they won't take out the local airport and stuff.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so this...
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, the F-18 hangars are right beside this blue hangar, the green hangar. But the significance. So 2021, the federal government said, hey, we no longer need the green hangar. And so you go, okay, well, that's pretty significant, because if you're trying to have an ability to have forward operations where you're having F-18s actually respond to threats in the Arctic, you kind of need an air-to-air refueling tanker to do that.
Yeah.
And so by saying that, by not having a tanker or sort of a hangar, that means that plane now has to sit out on the tarmac, very cold in Inuvik in the winter, about -40, blowing winds, right? And so the government just says, no, we don't need that anymore, right? And again, this isn't just a base. This is the base in the north. And so fast forward, well, what does that mean for us then? So what it means is the refueler has to take about 3 hours to warm up just to get in the air. Then it has to get ahead of where the F-18s are going to be, because you need them to keep going. They have about a 700-mile range. So that tanker now has to go for another 2 or 3 hours to get ahead of where it needs to be. And that's the most quick response we'll ever have now, is probably within 8 hours, right?
Wow.
And so I brought that question into the House. I said, well, any immediate response is off the table for us. And then Anand gets up and answers me and says, well, we're spending $4.9 billion, everything's fine. Well, it's baloney.
Yeah.
And so the bigger you're on it though, they can just quickly say whatever they want and kind of lull people into like, we're all okay, folks. Don't worry. Things aren't okay up there.
No.
And so now we have this threat that's very real by Putin and Beijing, and there's other forces too that just
just one, I guess, example of that is anybody who thinks it's not a big deal just to have an open border that completely unprotected. Well, then what the hell is the reason for the Alaska Highway?
Yeah,
in World War II.
Yeah,
like that we're sitting on right now.
They built it in 9 months.
There was obviously some form of importance there,
Yep.
and now you're just leaving it wide open.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm glad you're bringing that to people's awareness because I don't think people realize how important that actually is.
Well,
so what is the Chinese balloon? Was that just a hobby balloon or was it like, what was that?
No, it's been very clear, a spy balloon.
A spy balloon.
Oh yeah.
All the technology we have nowadays and the balloon is.
Yeah. It's because it can, I've seen the capabilities of our own devices and it's pretty impressive. So I just met with somebody yesterday about this very thing about our capacity to satellite data and how do we actually monitor traffic in the Northwest Passage and some different proposals how we can do that in this day and age.
Well, that's just it, that we have satellites and we have everything and they used a balloon that's dependent on weather patterns and that seems odd.
Yeah, well, and there's other things that are going on though, right? So it's just one more aspect. They're just being very thorough. That's only one way that they're spying. They're spying in many other ways.
Well, I'm sure. It's just, I guess maybe response time if you want to, which they found out.
Well, the key aspect, you asked about sovereignty because they often get, kind of intertwined with security. Sovereignty is really supporting people living on the ground in their own area. So me protecting your sovereignty is me protecting you having the ability to be present where you are. So other key aspects of sovereignty are making sure that people in different communities have abilities to stay warm, to have water to drink, to have livelihood there, to have an economy there. All this is making or enabling us to have us present in that area. So it's kind of a broader thing. It's got a security aspect to it, but it's even bigger than that.
It's actually tying in the Constitution.
Yeah. Very much so. Yeah.
Right for like the ability to be able to provide for yourself. Yep. Earn money, thrive.
Or
so that's being threatened.
The understanding is, if we don't, then if just imagine this area on the table here. If there's nobody present here, and claiming sovereignty, somebody else can. And so an example would be is if we're not present there, and all of a sudden. Country X shows up and starts developing resources and building houses and doing whatever, they could easily in the future make a claim of sovereignty because they're present there. So that's why Stephen Harper back in the day would make trips up to put the flag, saying this is ours. We believe it's ours. It's recognized that way internationally, but we need to again prove that in 2023 that we still believe it's ours.
Wow. So what has that resonated at all? Have you landed any of these concerns where anything changed?
So we brought attention. I'll just add one thing to that. And I say the flag on the land. There's a flag below the surface of the water too, and it's the Arctic seabed. So that's the bone of contention with us and Putin right now, is that we've recognized our territorial limits at the continental shelf. That's how far it extends. And Putin has made a claim to that. He says that and there's other countries too that have claims, but not like his, that they claim that Canada's territory only goes at the 200 mile limit, and that he's making claims. It's about 700,000 square kilometers. He's claiming that he believes that we believe is ours right now. That he believes it's his. And so he made this claim in 2015 at the UN. And this is the sovereignty thing piece is really important here. He recently made that claim just a month ago, reiterated that claim, that he's still claiming this Arctic. So what does that look like? Well, it could look like at some point he comes in with a drilling rig and says, hey, we know there's lots of natural gas. It's very important to us. They're very developed in their Arctic in Russia. Like highly developed, and he come in there. Then what do? he puts a drilling rig out there and stubs it on the seabed floor, then what do we do?
Well, we're not going to do anything, I don't think.
Well, I think we would, but I think we need to be thinking about that right now, that we need to be able to respond. And some of us are concerned about it. The Liberals don't look concerned about it, but we are. And I will say, you talk to people, you go up to places like Cambridge Bay and the Inuit people that I spoke with, I had a lady in tears saying, I'm worried about my family, that the threat that Putin poses, what he's doing in Ukraine, that he could possibly do to us. Like, because it's their front yard up there.
Yeah.
So for us, it's kind of that.
No, there's no,
you know,
it doesn't,
yeah.
well, we feel probably the same as I think people down in Victoria. It's over there.
Exactly.
We're not going to be affected. And they are on the front line, and it is a very real threat. It goes back to the Alaska Highway comment.
You betcha.
Wow. So what could be done?
Yeah. So what we, presence up there is important. And us, you know, there's a bunch of stuff that needs to go on there, but let's talk security first. Is NORAD needs to be modernized. There's no question about it. It's going to cost a lot of money. A part of what we support too is, you know, F-35s and really having a robust military to be able to respond up there. There's simple things like having paved runways. People don't know that the only paved runway really in the north is Inuvik. So you can't land air-to-air refueling tankers, the modern ones, anywhere but Inuvik. And you can't even do it in Inuvik because that runway's not long enough.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What about where the green tent is?
Well, that's Inuvik.
That's the only one?
Yeah. It's
not long enough.
So the modern one. So yeah. So the way they refuel right now is they ask the Americans to come and help us out.
Really?
Yep. That's what's happening right now.
Wow. So that plane, that air-to-air refueling plane, what is it being utilized for then? Just sitting in a hangar?
Well, it's not up there. So wherever, and we had other ones, and they're older ones. They're the C-130s was the one we used to use. But that's what. So the Americans are being tapped on the shoulder and asked to do it. But when you look, I was just in Washington, and Senator Lisa Murkowski, and we talked about some of this stuff. Because I'm part of the parliamentary arm of the Arctic Council, so we send 2 delegates from Canada and have discussions around this. They don't even think they're doing enough in Alaska based on this building threat of Russia and their aggression. So you may be able to tap them on the shoulder now, but the Americans are eventually, if they all push comes to shove, they're going to take care of home base first.
Does the government create laws that seemingly contradict the Constitution?
Yes. But this is where, and this is what happens often in a Supreme Court situation, is that is challenged because somebody says, we don't believe that's right, that law. So then it'll go to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court decides, is this constitutional?
It doesn't get ramrodded at the 11th hour. It seems like that's a tactic that gets implemented irregardless.
Oh yeah, they do. They ramrod it through, but I think, and this is the part people say, well, and even I said this too, the Constitution will be the backstop. The sad part of it is somebody's going to have to take that through the whole process, which is a very long process, right?
Yeah. To be able to stop it, what you're saying is okay.
Right.
There's a lot of things we touched on that's a bit alarming, eh?
Oh yeah, but well, there is, and it's real, right? So because when I see this stuff, so before I went up to Inuvik, this is why it's so important to be present on the ground. Is you don't know this stuff, but when you see it with your own eyes, you go, oh my goodness, what's going on? Well, and so another part of that story in Inuvik, so we go there and we hear the green hanger situation, and there's some other saga. It's still very much a real issue right now. But so that F-18 base I talked to you about, the hangar there, the 6 hangar bays. So we go up there and they said, oh yeah, in 2018, they all had tanks of fuel that sat out for every F-18, like 6 tanks that would sit out there. In 2018, the government said, hey, look, we don't need those. We're going to just use the fuel from the local airport.
Oh no!
That's to fill us up. So they literally
took
those tanks down. They cut them in half, and they're sitting behind the hangar right now. So I talked to somebody up there that it's a very, knows the airport in Nunavik very well. And they say, well, if they think that we have enough fuel for the CF-18s, we often don't have fuel enough for our own airplanes. That we're going to have just enough fuel on hand that's going to be able to fill up F-18s. So it's that kind of crazy stuff. You go, what the heck are you guys doing?
How do they get the fuel up to begin with? Do they have, they must be shipped?
In Nunavik, there's a road, right? You can drive up there, the Tuck Highway.
So they truck it?
Yeah.
They truck the fuel all the way up there?
Yeah, sure. And some of it comes into, if you're in a place like a Iqaluit, it comes in on a barge, comes on the water, because you're an island up there, Baffin Island, right? That comes in, and there's so much.
Which should only be dependent at a certain time of year, so you got to stockpile and.
Oh yeah, well, there's so many stories. They're just crazy when you hear them. But so part of what we were working on when we were in government was sort of a forward operating location for refueling Coast Guard vessels and things like that. Nana Civic is what it was called. And so this government, it was a deep water port, and it would be able to refuel in that key area. Because one thing people think, even with icebreakers, you can't go everywhere all the time. They won't cut through every piece of ice. There's certain multi-year ice that you won't get through, even with a nuclear-powered icebreaker. You just won't. But just an example, so this Nana Civic, again, it was a project by us. Still hasn't been built yet. Supposedly being finished up as we speak. That base now, because of cuts and different other things, that base will only be operational for 4 weeks out of the year.
Really?
Yeah, that whole base, because of budget cuts and different other things. Because the fuel tanks being used, they need to be heated in the winter, right? Because it gets super cold up there. So you think you're building this whole base that's supposed to refuel our Coast Guard vessels
for 4 weeks.
For 4 weeks
out of the whole year.
And so this is part of the. But this but it isn't just me. So you don't
even see this shit or this stuff in a movie.
But this where we find this information out is reports by the parliamentary budget officer, who says he writes a report on all this stuff. And so it's not even us, I can't even take credit for finding the information or doing the research for this. They're excellent at getting the facts on this stuff. And so I've done a series of videos of Arctic sovereignty because I was up there and just went through a litany of all what he said was the problem. And another one is this current government, there's going to be, Arctic surveillance, right? Satellite is a pretty significant part of what we're able to surveil because we're watching with the satellites. This government, because they haven't gotten the satellites sort of dealt with that issue, because they get to the point they're at end of life. I think it's 2025 or 2026. Anyway, I'll give it to you later. But if all things remain status quo, we won't have satellite coverage in the north. Satellite coverage for 8 years until the new satellites come on stream in 2032.
So end of life 2025 or 6 is end of life for those satellites.
Projected end of life.
From that point forward, we're not going to have any kind of.
There's no satellites that are going to be ready until 2032.
So you don't have eyes. You don't have really any way to protect sovereignty because you don't have a presence or a military.
Well, we do. We have the ability.
Okay, so
we can,
if you ask for help with fuel and some other things, I guess maybe. But
this is the same. This is the government that says, "Don't worry, guys, we got this covered." They don't have it covered.
No,
they don't.
So what happens now? Let's say things go the way we want it.
Yeah.
This is actually a two-phase question, actually, now that I think of it, because an election could happen real quick.
Yeah.
Which we should talk on if you have time. But more importantly, if, let's say now Pierre Poilievre ends up being our new prime minister and the Conservatives take control and hopefully a majority government in a way where we can actually do some real changes, is that something are all these things that need to be touched on so right away, or is there a whole process now of where hopefully within 4 years we're able to try and beef up everything that needs to be done?
There is a lot to do. And so what I've just said to folks is we've got a couple of things that we're going to do as much as we can right away to fix sort of the immediate stuff that needs to be fixed. But it's not going to be something that can be done overnight for a couple of reasons. And probably the most significant reason is the Liberals right now have a majority in the Senate. So basically what the Senate does is just what we do in the House. So every law that's made, there's 3 readings. And if they all make it through committee and pass, then it goes on to the Senate for the same process. So what you need in the Senate, you need still... So if we have a majority of MPs that are conservative in the Commons, that's only one part of it, one half of it. The next part, we need the majority of senators that would be conservative or vote conservative in the Senate. And that's not going to happen quickly because I think we only have about 18 senators left, and there's 99 total. There's some independent senators that are conservative-ish, and they might switch back to being conservatives on the other side. But so that's going to limit how much positive legislation we can do. That's legislatively. But some of the stuff like funding for military and doing all that stuff and getting things fixed that way, that's stuff that it's in the realm of what we're going to be in control of.
So I'm a little naive now with the Senate, and how are senators elected?
They're not.
They're appointed.
They're appointed by the Prime Minister.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is even if Pierre Poilievre became, let's say there was a majority conservative government, you don't even really have a pool of conservative senators to appoint in the Senate to be able to actually accomplish.
No, there's not. So we could find people to appoint. There's just no spaces. So the only way a senator is removed from their Senate seat is either they age out as soon as their 75th birthday, or they quit.
Really?
Yep.
Once they're appointed in there, that's a career move.
Yes.
For the rest till you're 75.
Senator Neufeld was a great senator. As an example, he had to step down at 75 on his 75th birthday.
I don't know if I'm really uniquely naive when it came to that, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
So the only ways they go is that they either say enough, I'm quitting, or resigning. And it's a pretty good gig. So not many do that.
Yeah. And what does it look like right now? This is primarily like a Liberal. Is it 50% more?
By
Liberal?
far, yeah. We had a majority when we were in government, and then it wasn't too long after we were done and Trudeau came in that they had the majority. It took a few years.
That's why he's able to go 11th hour and ramrod.
Yes. He's got a complicit Senate that kind of fast tracks things. We still have a group of senators in there that are strong enough they can try and delay things. But that's what's happening. So, but that's a long answer to your question too. But there's a lot of stuff just operationally. If you're a minister, and if there's a lot of things that you can do better that doesn't require a law.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Senate, it doesn't mean that we can't do anything good. No, we're going to get things, spending on track and all that stuff on track. That's going to be our big part of what our focus is. And we haven't announced our platform or any of that stuff yet, but I think anybody that watches Pierre in the House, you can see what kind of guy he is. He's a real deal. He's really...
Yeah, the nice thing about it is I like that there isn't, from what I can tell, more party politics, obviously play a little bit of a role in a lot of this. And I don't see, unless I'm not seeing it proper, but I'm not seeing as much of that. I know there's got to be, even though, with you being part of the Conservative Party, when it comes to the overall party position and the goals, there's going to have to be some give and take. And, that gets into the party politics of it all. But I think he's definitely got, the interest of all Canadians at hand. Yeah. And he's putting himself in a line of fire in a way I haven't seen too many other leaders of any kind of political party take.
Yeah, he's people need to understand too that he is, I've seen him behind the scenes, and he is principled and he is driven and loves his country. Right?
What do you think the odds are now? Because the way I'm seeing it from someone on my perspective is he's one man going against Liberals, the NDP, And then all these other little factions, you know, with Davos and the UN, and I think all these other, you know, entities outside of Canada. I mean, that's a monumental. And then, of course, I think over with the Canadian population being over in Ottawa, Montreal, Quebec kind of area. What are the odds? Like, I mean, they seem like he's going up against a lot.
Yeah, but there's you know, and we talked about the convoy. You know, a lot of those folks that showed up, as much as the mainstream media tried to paint them as radicals, they were. You saw them too. There was minivans from Gatineau, which is right just across the water, the Ottawa River, from Ottawa, or minivans with kids and their parents from Ottawa. So I think what he knows, and this is something we talked about, where I said I've never seen anything like it. The rallies that come out to see him and hear him talk, it's about freedom. And it's not just one kind of demographic like the old conservatives. It's a nurse that was made to do something she didn't want to do, or refused to, and lost her job because of it. They came, and they might have voted NDP their whole life up until that point. And it's the Liberal that was similar, saw the impacts to freedom that the government that they elected didn't. You know, the sunny ways was mysteriously gone now, and it was more of an autocratic thing. They're coming out to the rallies. It's a whole. The way I've explained it is, in one respect, is the old term "the man" in the 70s was the sort of white-haired conservative, whatever before. The new man is the government that's overreaching, that's saying you have to do it this way or that way, and there's a pushback, and it's a pushback from people that you wouldn't think. No, they're the new man is Trudeau, right? And that's why Pierre is resonating so well, is with that freedom crowd that says, well, I don't want to be told what to do with my life. I want to be, given the freedom to make decisions for myself.
I'm glad you said that, because you're right. Anyone
you saw
who's
him
there,
too, right?
I've met them all.
Yeah.
Believe me, people that didn't know any English whatsoever, and it was what was portrayed, as far as this really radical negative element. I mean, I wish all Canadians could have seen and experienced what we experienced there, because that was something that will stick with me for the rest of my life. I think I seen the best in humanity there. That's for sure.
Well, it was
amazing.
It was, there's a couple of guys on social media I follow now too, that just did great jobs of videoing what was actually going on the ground there. And I've said it often after, is that it's kind of, a year later, we used to have, like, snow clearing is really poor. The sidewalks aren't done very well often in Ottawa. You're walking through this slushy salt stuff all the time. But when they were there, man, the sidewalks were shoveled. There was garbage bags every about 20 feet. The garbages were getting picked up and taken care of. And man, Mr. Zimmer, hey, do you want hot chocolate, or do you? Because you get to know these folks walking across the house to the house to vote and stuff. And then we'd come to the house and we'd hear Jagmeet get up and talk about that he was afraid for his life crossing Wellington. Man. It's like, well, what street were you on? I just walked across and they were asking me if I wanted a hot chocolate. Yeah. Walking past a bouncy castle.
Yeah. Exactly. So, I mean, it is wild. We could.
Yeah. Well, to me, what I think is terrible about that, then we kind of laugh about it. But when you talk about, when I hear Jagmeet or I hear Trudeau talk about being divisive, they have been. I'll give this credit to Trudeau though, even though Jagmeet was equally divisive. Trudeau has been the most divisive prime minister that I've ever known. Yeah, and he deliberately does it. He deliberately polarizes, instead of saying, well, to be honest, there's maybe 1 in 1,000 people there that had questionable, and we don't even know if they were plants or whatever they were, but most of the people were just good people, wanting freedom. At least be honest about that. But when you deliberately kind of segregate an entire group, but I think, again, just what I said, when he said that, he criticized nurses, he criticized a whole bunch of people that used to support him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, the silver lining that a lot of people, they say, well, what was accomplished? And I think most importantly, I'm glad he did what he did in a way, because globally he was recognized for what his true colors. And not only that, but it put a spotlight on it in a way, but it shook a lot up. We had,
Sure did,
I think, the Liberal Party at that time, real time, have a real shake up. The Conservative Party, I mean, my goodness.
We saw leadership change as a result too.
Man,
which is,
there was so much that happened. And, you know, I was out of work myself. And when I was coming back, I wasn't even back to BC yet. And I had a phone call asking if I wanted to go to work. That would have never happened without that convoy.
There you go.
So, I mean, there's a lot there. I know you're looking at the time here. We should wrap it up, because this has been a lot longer than normal.
There's even a lot more.
There is. I mean, we're halfway through. So what I would like to do, I mean, there's so many, I'm itching to ask more questions, but
maybe
I think what we should
part
do,
2 will be in Ottawa. Who knows? Maybe next time, eh?
Yeah, actually, you know, that wouldn't be a bad idea.
Yeah, we can set it up. We even set you up in, I don't know what the logistics will be, but even just out of the chamber, do it right in the room. Yeah.
Oh, I would love
See
that.
if we can get that
Absolutely.
to happen. Yeah.
So to follow up with that, though, and at the very beginning, we mentioned something that Brian Peckford had mentioned. And I know it's wild that he's even a polarizing subject. That, you know, alone just blows my mind. But I mean, the Canadian Charter of Rights is something that I need it on my wall.
Yeah.
But I would like to, and I've said this with Dan and both Mike, I would like to do like a 3-month or like a quarterly meetup, you know, where we're not tying into such a huge, it doesn't have to be so long. We shouldn't have, you know what I mean? To try and make it more manageable.
Yeah.
Do 1 hour little segments once every 3 months or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah, if you're game, I think that
let's do it. I know we tried to do it the one time, and it just, the scheduling, that was my fault, but sometime that we can make it a more regular process, happy to. Because I do it, Energetic used to do it once every couple of months on a Friday. They just kind of an update or ask me about different things, and so
awesome.
Happy to. Yeah.
Okay. James Tope, should I ask that one? You met him.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it was a pleasure.
Was it June?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was, what was that like?
Yeah, it was good.
Soft-spoken guy, isn't he?
Oh, very, yeah. But no, I went up, I just respected what he was doing.
Yeah.
You know, here's a veteran just trying to make a difference, like any of us is. And I thought, man, this guy's walked across the country, for goodness sake. And so I gave him one of my challenge coins and said, thank you. Thanks for what you did, you know.
A which?
A challenge coin.
What is that?
It's like a little medallion that I have made. I have new ones made for my role as Arctic sovereignty. So I give them to military. It's a whole thing. You can look up on Google what a challenge coin is. It's quite a cool story. Yep.
And you gave that to James.
Yeah, and then there's
well, on the behalf of the I know there's going to be a lot of watchers right now that are going to thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks,
that's awesome for doing that for him.
Yeah,
because I know he was taking a little bit of heat, weirdly enough, too.
Yeah, well, and I some of that stuff I just don't care. Like, you know, there's a lot of noise, but you know, good grief, the guy's a veteran, and just you got to appreciate what he's trying to do.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, yeah, and there was a lot of folks that were, you know, and even that, like, I just think of different stories and people that I would walk into. There's actually still people there at the odd time that'll hold up a sign, and I just, you know, I'd say thanks for standing there and talking about euthanasia, and it's a big deal to me, and I'm protesting, and well, you know, just appreciate what you're trying to do. You're just doing what we're doing, except we get paid to do this, you know, and just sort of fight the good fight in Ottawa. But no, James Tope, he was just a good guy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear. We're well over 2.5 hours here.
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
I'm going to wrap it up. Looking forward. Thanks, guys. Looking forward to talking with you again, Bob. And thanks for your time. I really do appreciate it. I'm glad that it happened in the studio, so that's kind of a win for me.
Yeah. Well, let's try and have that. I know you've been talking about it, and maybe if you're in Ottawa, we can make sure a couple other folks drop by and say hi.
That would be awesome. Yeah, that would be really good. And I will be in Ottawa. We will stay in touch on that. Okay. We'll have to figure it out.
And appreciate what you're doing. I know you came out to Ottawa, but you're you're in your own way trying to make a difference, and thanks for doing what you're doing. And I know it was part of even the wildfires. I think it's, it's impacting some folks. Like for us, it's easy we watch it on the news, but when you talk to the Harrises or any of those other folks where the fires were at their doors and they thought they would lose everything. And then some friends stepped up to give them a hand. And it's just, I didn't do very much at all. I flipped some pancakes, for goodness sake, and did some videos, but it's all just to try and make a difference to help your neighbor.
Yeah, well, likewise for doing what you did, because there was a lot of presence there, and I know that it's like the general that's out in the troops, man. The presence and even flipping pancakes. But you did a lot there. I was really impressed at how much ground you covered. You were from Dawson Creek all the way up the highway in different spots and stuff. It takes everybody. It really does. And when it comes to the fires, at the end of the day, I've had a scare back, I think it was in 2017 or whatever, when we had the fire coming up South Taylor, in this area. And it checks you. I can't imagine losing everything. Yeah. Like anybody who loses all of that, and, this whole insurance and being able to restart, I don't know, man. It's something else when you're faced with just a shirt on your back.
I've seen it where, the old Fort situation where, a lot of promises are made by certain, whether it was the, I won't mention names perhaps, of the provincial government. And then, when push comes to shove on the other side, then those promises are kind of missing. Yeah. Where did they go? Where did that promise you said you'd have my back and do all this stuff? Yeah. So when I see people say, well, okay, I'm going to take care of my own house and make sure that I try and keep it from burning to the ground, I say, well, we need to support people trying to do that very thing, instead of, kind of emancipating them or taking away the ability just to defend themselves. I think we need to support them trying to do what they want to do. They want to protect their family and what they've earned.
I'm glad you said that. I get both sides of the story on that, as far as them staying back, and then you're putting resources in a way where now they're concerned about you, and I get that aspect.
Yeah, same.
But I mean, I really do. I'm from one where I've been in a close position like that, and you quite literally are losing your livelihood and absolutely everything. Right. That's a lot harder to do. And when you have the neighbors like you were talking about coming together like that, and community in general, it's a powerful thing. And hats off. Man, it takes those kinds of extreme situations where you see the best come out of people, don't you? Yeah. It's unreal. I think, and we all did our little part, and I don't think anybody, like some people did a little more than others, but I think everybody put in a little bit, and it made a huge difference.
Yeah, well, you think of all those ladies cooking, or Thomas Stahl really organizing a lot of it, and
shout out to Thomas Stahl.
Yeah, shout out to Thomas too for all that, but no, that's why I'm so proud of our community.
That's good. Yeah. I love hearing that.
Yeah,
right on. Okay, that's it, guys. That's it. Thanks again. I'm the one shutting this down. Can you believe that?
Until we meet again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks again, Kev.
Take care.
Yeah.
My question to the minister is: Canada in a housing crisis?
Honourable Minister.
Madam Chair, does the official opposition actually believe that Canadians have a right to a safe and affordable place to live?
Honourable Member.
The answer is yes. From Maclean's, the housing minister has a plan to solve Canada's housing crisis. So that's a yes. What is the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Victoria?
The Honourable Minister.
So do the official opposition believe in a right to housing, yes or no?
The Honourable Member.
Actually, he's to answer the question. It's not offer them here. It's $2,000 per month. What is the average home price in Yukon?
The Honourable Minister.
Chair, they miraculously think that doing less on housing will build more housing.
The Honourable Member.
Watching, whenever he doesn't answer a question, he means he doesn't know. What is the average home price for Yellowknife, Northwest Territories?
Sorry, I have a point of order. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, the member was trying to suggest the motive of the minister, and I don't think that it's appropriate.
So again, I think that's more of a point of debate. The Honourable Member.
Question remains. Will the minister answer?
Honourable Minister.
Madam Chair, I hope the party opposite actually comes around to appreciating federal investment in housing. They don't believe that we should do more on housing.
It's $500,000 according to Canadian Real Estate Association. And by the way, when that person gets up and does a point of order, it's code that the minister needs to read some of his notes. So that's why he does that. What is the average home price in Iqaluit, Nunavut?
Sir?
When that party was in office, they didn't invest in northern housing.
Member?
Speaker, according to the Nunatsiaq News, it's $706,950 for an average house. Incredible. What is the definition of core housing need according to the minister's own department?
Minister?
Madam Chair, they don't even believe in the right to housing.
Member?
That was an easy one. It means a household can't afford suitable and adequate housing in their community. So this leads to my next question. What is the core housing need in Yukon?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Chair, they didn't invest in housing in the north.
Minister.
The answer is 13.1% in Yukon. What is the core housing need in Northwest Territories?
Minister.
Madam Chair, they released a housing plan with no mention of homelessness.